Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this session. Thank you very much for having been in the conference with us until now. And thank you for joining for this session just after lunch. We are starting this session with a presentation which was developed by myself from the University of Alcalá and by Caroline Rossi de l'Université Grenoble-Alpes. This is a collaboration that we started last autumn because Caroline came for a research stay, and we have been working together, joining forces to work with telephone interpreting and machine translation and cognition. So you're going to see the results of it. First of all, we're going to start with telephone interpreting. You already know what this is. I'm just going to say that this is related to service provision and has traditionally been linked to public service interpreting. However, it is not just that. It is not just another modality of public service interpreting. It's been used extensively in other domains outside public service. And this is actually an example because we deal with service provision in the private sector. As you know, this is dialogic bilateral interpreting, and this poses difficulties for interpreters, and also when we want to approach automation and cognitive load and all these aspects that we are researching about in our studies. Interpreters usually have no briefing, so if the lack of briefing is quite traditional in service provision, public service interpreting mainly, for telephone interpreting this is even more remarkable. You know that telephone interpreters just take the phone and whatever can be on the other side, right? There's still scarce training for interpreters, for telephone interpreters, but this is increasing very fast. There are very nice projects being developed which cater for this need, and also the training is also provided at university level. It is true that perhaps we nowadays can't find a full program to train telephone interpreters, but telephone interpreting is embedded in public service interpreting, as is the case in the University of Alcalá, for instance, or in other modalities of interpreting or interpreting in general. Telephone interpreting, well, is delivered in different ways, so we can say it can take different shapes. The most common ones are, well, having two or more main speakers together, physically together, so on-site, and the interpreter connects remotely, but we also have another configuration, which is the three-way call, right? And this is the kinds of telephone interpreting we are studying. Telephone interpreting has been with us for a while, a huge while, but we already know, we have already some figures that are telling us that actually telephone interpreting has become more popular after the pandemic. It was not only during the pandemic. We can say that we are already in post-pandemic times and telephone interpreting is still very popular. This is also because service provision was done over the phone during the pandemic, and it's been kind of discovered that it is quite a comfortable way of delivering particular services, so independently from interpreting, so service provision in general. So it is very obvious and very easy to add a telephone interpreter to those interactions. However, scientific studies are still scarce for many aspects of telephone interpreting. So when we compare dialogue interpreting, in particular telephone interpreting, to other characteristics, to other modalities of interpreting, we can find special features for dialogue interpreting. There are structural differences, right? We have to think that we are dealing with spontaneous conversations. So we're going to find, first of all, a dialogue and not a monologue, and then we are going to find a dynamic communicative event. We are going to find, as interpreters, plenty of pragmatic features that obviously have an impact on the meaning which is conveyed. So it is not just words, it is not just referential meaning, it is something else. And then how information is presented and organized, this is quite different to the assignments that conference interpreters may have, in that it is spontaneous discourse. So many times when we are conveying a particular message, we find that information is completely disorganized in a conversation. Then in the end it is understandable, right? But even more importantly, when we are talking about communicative events which are not only spontaneous but also urgent, it may happen that information is given by the main speakers in a very disorganized way and starting someone from those details which are emotionally more important for the speaker, but not so important to build the whole meaning of the message which is to be conveyed. Okay, what happens when we combine interpreting and machines? Well, we already know that technology is very much present in translation assignments. So translators have adapted to a work environment which is characterized nowadays by the use of technology. So machine translation is there for already a long time, CAT tools are there, but what happens for interpreters? Well, apart from the use of the booths, or apart from the use of those technologies which actually make the delivery of interpreting possible, then other pieces of technology are not so much used. So computer-assisted interpreting is not so popular, and machine interpreting is not popular at all. When we think about the use of technology in interpreting, most of the times we are thinking about conference interpreting. So all the systems that are being developed which involve computer-assisted interpreting tools are mainly being developed for conference interpreting, but dialogue interpreting is particular in this respect. The cognitive load of dialogue interpreters is said to be higher when they have to coordinate discourse. However, the main concern for conference interpreters is related to terminology management. So computer-assisted tools for terminology management for conference interpreters are very useful. They are not so useful for dialogue interpreters. So is technology really relevant for dialogue interpreters over the phone? Well, could be, because actually telephone interpreting is quite computer friendly in that, well, usually telephone interpreters are going to be, well, sitting down perhaps at a desk with a computer in front of them, and they are not on site in the middle of a conversation just with a notebook, right? So telephone interpreting could be said to be more computer friendly than on-site dialogue interpreting. And actually, technology is used to develop and provide protocols and guidelines for telephone interpreters based on clients' needs, for example. Telephone interpreting companies also offer glossaries, which are, well, terminology is extracted from real conversations. And also, apart from terminology, sets of patterns are also extracted from real conversations, which are also useful for, at least for the preparation of telephone interpreting assignments. Then telephone interpreters, we already know that they use browsers many times at the same time they are delivering the interpreting assignments, and in preparation for the assignments, they also use other tools, such as Interpreters Bank or Interpreters Help. We know that they do not use note-taking devices so much because they do not do so much note-taking. That translation suggestions, automatic translation suggestions are not so useful for them, and that they do not use at all voice recognition. This is extracted from an ongoing piece of research developed in collaboration with Universiteit Brussels. Okay. So, if we take into account the cognitive load of dialogue interpreters and the current use they do of KAI tools, then we want to reflect about the automation or semi-automation of interpreting, but also about the use of machine translation for KAI tools for telephone interpreters. Okay, for this, a collaboration the collaboration of Professor Caroline Rossi with our research group in this particular project is very useful. This is a project which received regional funding. It is already finished. We were examining three-way calls for an interpreter-mediated calls for an insurance company. This is an example of university-industry cooperation. So one of the milestones of this project was to actually compile the corpus, which you can see is quite big. And I'm glad to say that it is open. So these are the figures for the project which already finished, but we've got another project which started in January, which completely opened the corpus. So now it is a totally open corpus. We can extract as many recordings of telephone interpreted interactions as we want. And for this particular study, we have focused on the combination Spanish-French, but the corpus is in many languages. This is a total number of 92 recordings. Well, usually we are using the software Esmeralda, which allows us to examine both the transcription and the audio file of a particular conversation at the same time. And for this particular project, we also use CLAN, which is very useful to convert the transcript to chat format, and then it is also very useful to annotate it for analysis. Okay, what we wanted to do was to, first of all, to find out about the cognitive load, right? So we wanted to have a look at lexical diversity, which is not the same as lexical density, right? So if lexical density, well, this is explained very fast, but lexical density is going to focus on content words, whereas lexical diversity, although it correlates with lexical density, it focuses on different words. Doesn't matter whether they are content or words or not. So, apart from that, from the 92 recordings, we took into account the onset of fatigue for remote interpreting. We have to think that this onset of fatigue is being documented regarding conference interpreting. So this is for remote simultaneous interpreting, right? Not for dialogue telephone interpreting. But this is the only figure that we can extract from literature right now, which is related to fatigue. This means that we took 15 minutes as the onset of fatigue for telephone interpreters. This left 60 recordings out, so usually dialogue interpreting assignments are quite short, but you can see that we still had 32 recordings, longer than 15 minutes, and the longest of the recordings was 45 minutes. Not bad for a telephone interpreting assignment. Okay, so these are our two research questions. First of all, we want to know about lexical diversity, because that is something which is going to inform us about fatigue. And then, when we want to consider machine interpreting or machine translation as a help, a possible KAI tool for dialogue interpreters, we also want to find out whether neural machine translation is useful to translate the kind of discourse which is being conveyed. We did an exploratory study with manual annotation of the recordings, taking into account lowest and highest lexical diversity. And then we also use DeepL to examine interesting sequences. Okay, we took client utterances as an example for this presentation, and I'm going to show some examples about recordings with higher and lower lexical diversity. Okay, this is the diversity of the recordings. Sorry, it is going quite fast. And we are going to examine those which present a lower lexical diversity first. So this is one of the examples, recording 67. So here we can say that lexically speaking, this is not challenging at all. So this should be quite easy, right? But if you have a look, well, the example is in French. If you have a look at this, you can see that actually there was some miscommunication in here, but this is not related to vocabulary. Vocabulary is really easy. So what happened here? Well, just the same as in here. I'm not reflecting the extracts here because they were too long. In recording 18, the interpreter signals problems in understanding what the client says in up to 3 times. And in recording 84, the client's understanding is repeatedly checked, right? Pour être sûr d'avoir bien compris, all the time. And then another native speaker joins the conversation, a native speaker who is with a French speaker, native speaker of Spanish who is with a French speaker joins the conversation as well. What is happening here? Well, technical difficulties. So it is not about the terminology management. This time it was about technical difficulties, particularly sound quality. And what happens when there is a problem, an issue with sound quality? Well, usually both sides speak slowly and use fewer words. So conversation is more concise. This is the proportion of recordings with, well, technical difficulties related to problems of, to noise, basically. Just take into account that many times these calls are made from environments which are not quiet, so the clients may have noise around them or connectivity issues. Okay, this is another example of difficulty and misunderstanding. What we've got in here is one of the speakers using a word which is not that common, right? So this is about the vocabulary. Here, machine translation should be useful. And this is the output of the human versus the output of the machine. Okay, as the problem, I'm not going to translate, but I'm going to tell you what this is about. As the problem is with a particular word, which is a term which is not used correctly, so the client doesn't know the term for a sign, right, and uses something else, the interpreter is able to explain this, right, to convey that that is not a standard term. Of course, the machine is not able to do this. And translates with a word which is not related to our context. Okay, what happens with high lexical diversity? Well, here we find pragmatics. When we've got high lexical diversity, it is because clients speak longer, but usually what is happening is that they are trying to engage in a conversation because there is a disappointment. They repeat information quite a lot. So this is about conveying other kind of meaning, right, which is at the pragmatic level. Okay, here we can see how the client uses 126 words and the interpreter summarizes it in 63 words. Well, this is because there is plenty of repetition, because information is not that relevant. Okay, I'm going to, should be faster. Right, what happens is that actually the client is just focusing on something, which is that he doesn't agree on what is happening, right? Something is unacceptable. So, when the interpreter insists of the unacceptability of the situation, then the meaning is conveyed. However, when the machine engages in translating everything, this is written down, but just imagine the machine voicing this. It is going to be voiced at with the same tone all the time, with the same intonation. Then the unacceptability of the situation is not going to be conveyed as well. Right? Here's the unacceptability of the situation, which is not so visible. Okay. It also happens, as I was telling you before, that sometimes information is disorganized because the client is nervous when conveying the information, or because, well, people usually, when we are speaking in a spontaneous context, it can happen that we have not thought about how to organize information and we are not as fast as being able to organize things. So we are organizing information actually in an emotional way. The interpreter may rework this and put the most relevant pieces of information before, and in this way is organizing the conversation. This is done naturally, right? The machine would never do that, right? And this is what happens to the machine when repetition is involved. The machine repeats, of course, right? Okay. However, what happens with this? Well, here we've got the opposite example. This is by the end of a conversation, which was not easy at all, because there was a lot of arguments going on. And here there is the use of irony. The interpreter says, bon courage, good luck, and the client says, yes, we'll need it. And the interpreter suddenly doesn't catch it, and it's like, what? Well, the machine catches it and conveys it quite well. Well, this is surprising because this is pragmatics, which is well conveyed by the machine, and it is also cognitive overload, which is not there for the machine. The machine doesn't get tired. Okay. Have you ever had an argument with a machine? Because I have. Right? So this is what happens when you've got an argument with a person. And usually the outcome is not so bad. This is the end of the conversation. One is quite satisfied, perhaps nothing has been done, right? So the problem hasn't been solved, but at least you've been having a nice argument and you're a little bit more satisfied. Just imagine this with a machine. So many times interaction in service provision is also about client satisfaction. And sometimes, well, I have to say that quite frequently we have arguments with service providers. Okay, actually our corpus shows that interactions are quite similar. So needs should also be similar for all of the interpreters engaging in these kind of assignments. But we've been exploring the interface between the cognitive and situational levels, and we have to say that it is not as easy as saying, okay, pragmatics is impossible to translate by a machine, or the cognitive load makes it impossible or useless to work with technology. There are there are some situations in which the telephone interpreter is at odds with neural machine translation, right? But many times, neural machine translation is already conveying meaning quite well, even at pragmatic level. So, which could be the avenues for future research? Well, perhaps the isolation of speech acts and situations where automation is useful. So it is not going to be something to be used in all kinds of situations, but it might be useful to consider it for some of them. And well, just think about this. Have you ever had an argument with a machine? I'm sure you have had one. Okay, thank you very much. Have you got any questions?
Thank you, Raquel. Up close and personal as a moderator running around as well. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering about one of the conclusions that you've got is about the FTAs. NMT seems to work well for FTAs, but isn't that the case simply because it translates basically what is there and it doesn't think? Because I've got the impression that the interpreters in this case were very task-oriented, meaning we want to be very efficient. We've got a client with a problem, the problem has to be conveyed as efficiently as possible, and that's it, and let's skip all the niceties of hedging and whatever, a nice build-up to mask that this is a face-threatening act or whatever. Let's not do face saving because we're not concerned about that, whereas the machine simply faithfully translates what is there. But couldn't there be certain contexts in which the machine could go wrong because it simply doesn't pick up on this is an FTA and I need to address this somehow, whereas the person would? And how is this specific to this situation? Because it's insurance companies, so this is very, very case-based.
Well, thank you. I really like your question because actually the project, which started in January, particularly addresses face-threatening acts and is built on a Brannon-Levinson classification, and a bigger corpus is being tagged with the whole classification that is very complex and very, well, many times when we think about face-threatening acts, we think about irony or insult or being impolite, but face-threatening acts also imply other mechanisms such as Thanksgiving or things like those. So it is quite complex. The thing is that we've got two different things which are being approached. One is cognitive load and the other one is, well, the use of machine translation. So relating to pragmatics, actually face-threatening acts are difficult to understand not only by machines, also by human beings. And this particularly applies to multicultural encounters because politeness is culturally bound. So it is not going to work all the time, of course not, because pragmatics is really difficult to convey across cultures, and when we are thinking about machines, that is really, really difficult. But I really think there are going to be some cases related to face-threatening acts which are going to be easier to automate, or at least it is going to be easier to develop guidelines for those interpreters, human interpreters, who will have to convey those face-threatening acts. The project, by the way, will finish in December 2026, so just in time for the following conference. So I will tell you more about this in some years. Thank you for the question.
Where? Okay. I will... Voy a dar la vuelta. Yeah, I believe you showed a slide that showed a percentage of the conversations that had technical problems. 24 experienced technical problems and 8 did not, but I didn't quite get it, and the setting. Could you elaborate a bit on that? Do you have a percentage number of how many percentage of your material that experienced technical problems?
Yes, we've got, perhaps the most useful slide we had about that was the issues with sound quality and technical problems. Sorry, because I closed it. So, and we do have a percentage. This one. So, these were problems where, the conversations where the interpreter was not able to hear properly. So this is quite common in this kind of encounters. But these encounters are very, it is not that all telephone interpreting encounters are going to be like this. These are mainly road assistance and house insurance companies. So what happens is that many times these calls are made from environments which are noisy or which have low connectivity, right, with connectivity issues. But when we are doing telephone interpreting assignments and the interpreter is contacted from a place where there is no noise, or at least sound quality is better, and there is a landline or perhaps a better connectivity, this is not going to happen. So we always have to take the context into account. Okay, and I think we do not have much time, so perhaps we can go on with the following presentation, and I apologize for having taken so long. So the following presentation is entitled Implementing Video Remote Interpreting in Reception Agencies in Belgium, Challenges and Opportunities, and is going to be delivered by Julie de Wilde from the University of Ghent.
Thank you, Raquel. Hi. This presentation is a joint venture work, so I'd like to also mention Katrijn and also the research assistant, because they were very important also in the project. What would I like to discuss with you? So briefly, a few words on the organization with whom we worked, trying to implement a video remote interpreting program. A few words on the research project, and I will discuss with you some challenges, some opportunities. I won't be able to give an overview of the whole project, that won't be possible, and I will draw up with some concluding remarks. So first, the context where with whom we worked. It was a project that Ghent University did together with, and really in close collaborations between researchers and practitioners from FedAsyl. FedAsyl is the federal agency for the reception of asylum seekers, and it's a government institution. It depends on the Ministry of State of Asylum and Migration. But it has an autonomous way of working, and it's been active operating since more than 20 years now. FedAsyl has many missions, but maybe the two most important for today. The first one is that it is the institution that provides high quality, that's what it states, high quality material aid and reception for asylum seekers, and it does so through group or collective reception infrastructures, but also some individual ones, so smaller housing that they offer for specific targeted groups. They have some of them in their own management, and for some of them they also collaborate with partners. The most known one is probably the local divisions of the Red Cross, but there are other partners also. Next to providing material aid, there's also a second very important mission. Fedazil has the legal obligation to inform the residents, so the asylum seekers living in these infrastructures, about their rights, about their obligations, but also informing about the procedure. Very important though, Fedazil in itself is by no means involved in the decision making. So, and it doesn't take any decision in the asylum procedure, etc. And this kind of ambiguous situation between, on the one hand, having the obligation to inform on the procedure, on how it's going, and very often to be the messenger of the bad news, in case of asylum procedures having received a negative decision on the one hand, and on the other hand, the fact that they at no point whatsoever intervene in that decision making sometimes creates conflicts or potential for misunderstanding, because on the one hand they are the persons who are very, very close to the person, the staff are the persons being very close to the asylum seeker, so there's quite a collaborative setting there, but at the same time it's often also a very adversarial setting, when there is bad news to be brought, when there's sadness, when there's rage, etc. So that's something which we noticed, which was very particular to that particular setting of Fedazil. To give a second particularity is that the target group with whom they work is a very vulnerable target group. We've talked about this morning also, but to give one quote of an asylum seeker from Afghanistan who had been in Belgium for 7 years, stuck really in an administrative limbo. This is what he said: well, in my country the Taliban would hit me with the bullets, but here they kill us with the pen. So basically, access to language or to specific mediations of those languages is very important, but not always possible. Because of the target groups, because of the mission, because of the migration patterns over the last few years, Fedazil is by default an extremely multilingual, multicultural context, and the ways of handling that multilingualism is what we see in many organizations, in many institutions. They try with whatever means they have. So globally, and in a nutshell, maybe for Fedazil, there is, centrally speaking, from the central administration, there is no guiding procedure strictly being respected. There's no legal framework that is being imposed. The staff, but also the different facilities, have a lot of professional autonomy. Professional autonomy in deciding when to work with what kind of language or communicative support, whether an interpreter, whether another resident, whether a multilingual staff member, etc. And this leads to an enormous variety in terms of what they use, when they use it, for what kind of service provision. They also work next to interpreters. They also work with pre-translated information leaflets. They have a multilingual information provision website. So they try whatever means they have. Let's say that. So a few words very briefly on the 2-year project. The aim was to facilitate VRI in the reception facility. So VRI in the sense that the two primary participants were always co-located and the interpreter was working remotely through video. And Fedazil had several motives to try to promote the video remote interpreting, but I will limit myself to the three most important ones for today. The first one was that a lot of these infrastructures are situated in very rural, remote areas where it is difficult to have an interpreter on site. So what they expected was that a consequence of this difficulty of having these interpreters on site very remotely was that there still is a lot of telephone interpreting. And that was judged not adequate for specific type of service provision. So for instance, very lengthy conversations or information conversations with a lot of emotion, very conflicting or conflictive situations, etc. So Fedazil hoped to be able to substitute to some extent the telephone interpreting by the video remote interpreting, and by those means to enhance quality of the service provision. And a third element, a third motive for mobile was that especially for the languages, the more rarer languages of lesser diffusion, they tried really, or they had the expectation that because these interpreters who are very rare wouldn't have to lose time in transport. So the hope was that the offer, the supply would be increasing also. We worked in different phases. In the first phase, what we did was really have a look observationally and through interviews, have a look and analyze the needs and also the expectations and the specific context in which these persons are working. Next, we facilitated a pilot of video remote interpreting, and then third part, maybe the most important part, was to analyze the desirability and the feasibility of VRI in that specific context. And for that, we analyzed video recordings, interactions. I will only talk briefly or touch briefly upon the first and the third element today. So what did these interviews, these observations in situ, what did they learn us? We had interviews with the demand side, but also with the supply side. There was I think I'm allowed to say that it was the biggest obstacle was that the way PSI interpreting agencies work in Belgium were incompatible with what they were expecting or desiring. The immediate needs in those in those infrastructures. We need an interpreter now, or when I book an interpreter, my resident isn't coming. So the mismatch was above all between the conditions for booking, the delay necessary for booking an interpreter, the cancellation policy. Those kind of issues were really incompatible between the two parties involved. Secondly, quite some issues with equipment and quite some issues with infrastructure. Basic things which we thought were basic, a device equipped with a good camera, with a good mic, but also silent, quiet rooms to be able to work in good conditions for the remote interpreter. That proved not so obvious in that specific context. And then the third element, a big variety in technological literacy. Maybe to put it very bluntly, I would say that people working in reception facilities, they are very passionate about working with people, but maybe a bit less about working with devices or with machines. So that was really something we sensed that was difficult in terms of opening a meetings link, for instance, but also in terms of changing settings whenever there was an issue, etc. And then fourthly, language is not really the first problem, in the sense that staff members are very often in other types of crises, they are facing other types of difficulties. So they thought that telephone interpreting was working fine. So why should we change something which is working fine? So there were some attitudinal and professional aspects also. But next to these, or apart from these attitudinal, organizational issues, I think our main question was as to how desirable and feasible is it to have video remote interpreting in that specific context. And for that, we analyzed from the total corpus of we selected 10 interactions for in-depth qualitative analysis, and I will discuss now just a few issues. The first thing, a very obvious thing, I think, for us, for most of us, is that the positioning and the way a setting is being handled was not an obvious thing for everyone, despite our insistence, despite our schemes, the schemes that we made. So, for instance, here, we really saw a great diversity or variety in how staff members use or position themselves with the screen. In this particular case, the staff member was really interacting not with the resident who was next to her, but really with the screen and with the interpreter through the screen. And it's also the position, the distance, the fact that she's much closer to the screen, the fact that her upper body is really oriented, that talking to the resident, talking to the asylum seeker is a very unnatural movement. In stark contrast with this situation, for instance, where it is much more easier to talk with each other. Surprisingly, or maybe not that surprisingly, when we analyzed in those conversations, when we analyzed the verbal behavior and in particular the forms of address, we noticed that there is a clear link between, or there are clear links between how they position themselves and then the forms of address that they use. In the first interaction, for instance, not once does the staff member uses pronouns to talk with her resident, with the asylum seeker. In the second conversation, where we see a more mitigated picture, there is also a mixture in the ways of address. A second element I'd like to comment upon was that, well, given the motives of FedAsyl, namely to be able to give through video remote interpreting also access to the visual cues, we looked really into the advantages or the possible advantages of VRI in that specific setting. Here, for instance, we see clearly that an advantage was that the interpreter, when he was signaling, "I'm not ready yet, please don't interrupt," in these sometimes very emotional, very conflicting situations, and the asylum seeker wanting to interrupt, what we see in comparing these screens is, for instance, that the staff member being co-located with the asylum seeker can collaborate and can urge, as you see there, she urges really, she touches, she uses also non-verbal behavior to tell the asylum seeker, just a minute, he's almost finished, then it's your turn, etc. So other advantages were clearly when there were long lapses of silences, which without a visual can be very unfortunate what is happening. So that and in that kind of context, it happens a lot when, for instance, there is an emotional moment, or when someone comes in the room, a colleague, etc. Which happens very often. Last thing that I would like to discuss was that the collaboration, or the close collaboration with staff members, also allowed us to create more awareness, also that the fact of communicating and how an interpreter can do his own or her own work depends on a large part on a shared responsibility. I will show here an example. The interpreter is sitting, you can see him there. This is the asylum seeker. He has a mental health problem, and he has been referred by another staff member to a specialized center. The name of the specialized center is SIBO. We will see it. And then we'll have a look to see how it is being interpreted by the interpreter. Just to mention one important point, what the social worker, she's off screen, she's sitting at this side, what she wants to tell the asylum seeker is that given his status, he does not have the right to go to that specialized center. It is not possible given his status. So we will have a look at how it is being interpreted by the interpreter. So now the interpreter.
مش الحل بالنسبة لك يعني في الحالات الضرورية ممكن بس في الوضع الحالي مش الحل بالنسبة لك.
So what he says is quite different than what the social worker had been saying. What he says is that it is not possible in this particular moment, but in case of an extreme emergency, then it will be possible to transfer you to the specialized center, which is not what the social worker had been saying. She says, given your status, and as long as the status doesn't change, you will not be able to be transferred, you will not be able to go to that specialized center. So in terms of expectation management, particularly for these kind of very vulnerable target groups, the interpreter is definitely not doing a good job. But that was not our point, or our main point. Our main point when we went with these data to the Federal staff members was that in reality, the job of the interpreter can be facilitated, can be made easier or more complex depending on what type of information and how much information is being given. What we saw with the social worker, she does not explain what SIBO is. She doesn't explain what an orange card is. No one knows what it means. Procedurally, it is not possible. So there's no briefing at all. There's no meta-communication. She doesn't make abstraction of her specific context of service delivery. So that kind of elements were also very important in the collaboration because it allowed also service providers to see from a closer look through the microanalytical lens that communication and information provision is really a shared responsibility. So, and especially so in the case of interpreters for the rarer languages, because in terms of training, in terms of experience, in terms of knowledge on the administrative issues in Belgium, they do not have yet the same background as maybe other type of interpreters. Concluding, this kind, I already anticipated a bit, this kind of close collaboration did allow us to have deeper insights and also to be confronted or to be informed with the limits of each specific institutional context. But what it above all allowed us was that it gave us the opportunity also to show and to create more awareness among the service deliverers. Because usually, I already said it, oh yeah, we also need an interpreter, or an interpreter is not necessary, we will manage without an interpreter. So when we went to the Federal staff with these kind of data, they had a closer look and said, oh, yes, just explicitating what is meant by procedurally, by SIBO, this would help a lot. And of course, there's not one solution because many of the obstacles that we saw were beyond our control, beyond our scope really, because it demands more investments, equipment for instance, and also organizational choices that sometimes can or have to be imposed from top down. But of course, and we heard it in I think in the plenary yesterday, it needs time and people need to be flexible and adaptable. During the 2-year project, we really sensed the collaboration of a few early adopters who have a very important responsibility in further disseminating the possibilities of VRI. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have time for one question.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation, very interesting material as well. I was just wondering about the positioning that you mentioned at one point, which was difficult to convey to Fedazil apparently, how to manage that. I was just wondering, here you've mentioned a couple of cases where you always have a social worker as a practitioner, but it could just as well be, for instance, a therapist working with an asylum seeker. And if I'm not mistaken, there are cases where you've got an asylum seeker and a therapist in one room and the interpreter somewhere else working remotely. Could that give rise to conflicting expectations as to positioning? I can imagine that a therapist also has ideas as to what would be the ideal positioning vis-a-vis the asylum seeker, and then there's the expectation of the interpreter working remotely, and that also gives rise to certain expectations. Is that something which you've already encountered, or is it something that could be envisaged as being problematic? It's an open question, I have no idea.
Yeah, we saw the type of conversations that we observed were never to give a straight answer, I think that there, because the two examples that we saw were very extreme, but in between we really had a lot of variety where not necessarily they have to be in front one of another, and that also works. So what we did with them was create a leaflet so that we could leave it there, have a look, be careful when you position your computer screen, etc. But it was not always a question of positioning, but it was also a question of the screen being unnatural for some persons, that it really took over as another primary participant. So they forgot the other person. And as for their preference, because it's also the kind of service delivery maybe imposes a kind of positioning, a particular positioning, in our conversations or interviews with them, we didn't have any echo of persons saying, well, this type of positioning for me and to do my type of service provision is impossible. No one mentioned that. It might be, but no one mentioned that.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are going for the following presentation. This is delivered by Dries Cavens and Jelena Branges, both researchers at the Department of Translation and Interpreting and Communication at Ghent University. They are going to deliver the presentation entitled Rapport Management and Multimodality and On-Site and Video Remote Interpreting.
Hi, hello everyone. So thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Dries, and indeed I'm going to tell you something more about rapport management and multimodality. This is a part of my PhD project with Julie de Wilde and Jelena Vranjes. And specifically, I'm going to tell you something about the pilot experiment that we conducted at the end of 2022. First, I'm going to give you a brief introduction about the project itself and what we want to achieve with it. Then I'm going to give you some information about the theoretical framework that we're going to use to analyze our data. Then I'm going to give you the gist of in the presentation, which is the pilot itself. And then some things that we want to do with the information that we got from the pilot. So without further ado, the introduction, I'm going to start with by saying two things that most of you probably already know, namely that interpreters play a very active role in dialogue interpreting, and this also means that they have an important influence on the way in which interpersonal relations are being managed in dialogue interpreting. And secondly, the other thing that you probably already know is that in recent years there has been an increased demand for video remote interpreting due to technological advances in COVID and so on. And what we are actually interested in this project is we want to see how these interpersonal relations are being managed in the video remote interpreting interactions, and how that is done both verbally and non-verbally. So that's why the project is titled Rapport Management and Multimodality, because we want to combine these two aspects. Literature has already shown that non-verbal behavior is important in the management of interpersonal relations, but there has never been any research into the non-verbal behavior used to manage interpersonal relations in VRI, and also the research that has already looked into interpersonal relation management in interpreting has mainly focused on on-site interpreting and not on video remote interpreting. So that's why we want to look into this. How are we going to analyze the management of interpersonal relations? Well, for that we're going to use the rapport management theory by Spencer Oty, and she defines rapport management as the management of interpersonal relations, the use of language to promote, maintain, or threaten harmonious social relations. And it's important for us that there are these several possibilities for using rapport management, so both for promoting, maintaining, and threatening harmonious social relations. Raquel also had talked about face threatening acts, which is also a way in which you could look at the management of interpersonal relations. I'm going to give you some more information about this theory. First, I'm going to tell you where it comes from, and then I'm going to tell you something more about its basic components. The origin of this theory actually comes from some criticisms that were formulated on the politeness theory by Brown and Levinson. The two most important criticisms are that it ignores the personal and social perspective of the management of interpersonal relations, and it also overemphasizes the individual freedom and autonomy of the speakers. So basically it actually comes down to the fact that it's much too speaker-oriented and much too intention-oriented, looking only at the speaker's intention with one certain utterance and not looking at the entire context of the interaction and the things that are taking place in the entire interaction. And that's why Spencer Oty developed this rapport management theory in which he tried to balance, to create a better balance between self and the other. The basis of the theory are three components: interactional goals, sociality rights and obligations, and face. And that's also the phase that comes back from the face threatening acts Raquel talked about. Briefly explaining them, so interactional goals are goals that people have during interaction. For instance, when a patient goes to a doctor, they want to be cured for the disease that they automotivated a treatment. Sociality rights and obligations are things that, these are fundamental social entitlements which a person effectively claims for themselves in their interactions with others. So basically a teacher has an obligation to teach their students a certain subject or a certain matter, but also has the right to be treated with respect by those students. And then face, a lot has already been written and said about face, so I'm not going to dive too deeply into that. I would need a separate presentation entirely for that. But to keep it short, face is the positive social value a person effectively claims for themselves by the line others assume they have taken during a particular contact. Now that you know something more about how we're trying or we're going to analyze the data, let me tell you something more about the pilot itself. We formulated 2 research questions that we want to answer with this experiment. The first one is, which non-verbal rapport management strategies do participants do on-site interpreting and video remote interpreting interactions employ? So basically just looking what's out there, what's being used. And the second one was, what's the influence of the VRI setting on participants' use of rapport management strategies? Based on these 2 questions, we formulated 3 hypotheses. First one being the VRI setting will require more rapport management than the OSI setting. Participants will use more non-verbal rapport management strategies in OSI than in VRI because of the fact that there is more access to non-verbal communication in on-site communication. And thirdly, the participants will compensate for the lack of access to non-verbal communication in VRI by using more verbal and more disruptive rapport management. Can't say a lot more about these hypotheses because of time restrictions, but I just wanted to give them to you. The design of the pilot, I want to tell you something more about it. So we asked 2 interpreters to interpret 2 interactions, one on-site interaction and one video remote interaction. And these interactions were based on scripts that we drew up based on authentic data from the migration sector. And then we asked 2 role players, 2 actors actually, to play out the half-open scripts that we had written. Half-open scripts means that there were no real specific turns that they had to act out, but they were more given some general instructions and content of the rapport management strategies that we wanted, or the content that we wanted them to convey, and at the same time also giving some guidelines about some conflict and some emotions to be able to elicit some rapport management strategies that the interpreter should have to use. Obviously, we wanted to use the interactions as data for our analysis, so we used video cameras to record everything. After each interaction, the participants were asked to fill in a short survey of about 10 questions, asking them about some general feelings they had of the interaction. Were there any moments in which they felt awkward or uncomfortable, and why? Did they feel like they had to change their behavior, verbal and non-verbally, due to the on-site or the online setting, and so on and so forth? And then, in a final step of the experiment, we conducted semi-structured interviews with the participants after the analysis, in which we asked them about things that we wanted to know, for instance, things that we got from the survey that we found interesting. We also used a stimulated recall method in which we showed them little clips of the interactions, asking them about certain instances that we were interested in, and so on and so forth. The setup of the experiment was as follows. So we had the interpreter sitting at the head of the table, and then the Dutch and the Spanish-speaking participants sitting opposite of each other, and then the white circles with the red dots in them are the cameras. So we had 3 cameras, 1 for each participant, because we really wanted to be able to capture all the non-verbal behavior that they were showing during the interaction. The setup for the video remote setting was like this. So we used Microsoft Teams as a software, and all participants were located in different rooms. So it's not the setting that Julie was talking about earlier, where the 2 persons are in the same room and then the interpreter is located somewhere else. It's really like complete remote setting in which the 3 of them are in a different location. And we also use an iLink portable remote eye tracker for the interpreter, in which actually allowed us to gain more access to the gaze data of the interpreters, and that's why you see the green dot on the screen. That's what the interpreter is looking at on the screen. So that was the design of the experiment. Now I want to give you some more information about the analysis and also show you some examples. So we transcribed and back-translated all the data in Elan, which is a software that has already been mentioned in this the past few days, which is really good for multimodal analysis. Then we annotated all the report management strategies using the categorization that I told you previously about, the 3 components. And then we performed the qualitative microanalysis of the instances that we found, all the report management strategies that we could determine in the interactions. And then obviously after the analysis we conducted the interviews. I want to show you one example of report management that we encountered, because I know that this may all sound very vague and very abstract, so I want to make this very concrete. I want to look with you to, thank you very much. I want to look with you to a few extracts where the interpreter has to ask the client for clarification multiple times during the same interaction, and she feels like that she has to, after a few times, she has to start giving some clarification for why she has to ask for some justification why she has to keep on asking for clarification to the Spanish-speaking participants. So in this case, we're actually looking at the interpreter's professional face being threatened by the fact that she has to keep on asking for clarification. I'm going to show you the scripts, but I also brought some clips, so I'll show the clips and then I'll go to the script, the transcript with you. The first video. So what we see here actually is that the interpreter asked the question and then relayed to the Dutch-speaking participant that she had to ask for some clarification, which is something that's fairly usual and common in interpreter-mediated interactions. And so this was the second time that she had to ask for some clarification, and we see already that she gives some extra details, because she says regarding the content, and also in the previous one, the service provider, he only nodded, so he gave some non-verbal acknowledgement of the fact that she had to ask for clarification. Here, he already gives both non-verbal and non-verbally. He nods and he says "mm-hmm" to like acknowledge to the interpreter, it's fine, I acknowledge the fact that you inform me of this. In the third example that I brought, the interpreter does something else. So what we saw here is that, and you probably already heard it on the audio as well, there is a lot of echo, and that's why she has to keep on asking for clarification. And she starts giving that as a justification for why she has to ask the Spanish-speaking participant to repeat certain things. So she says first in Spanish, I don't hear you very well, and then she relays also the same thing to the Dutch-speaking participant. He kept nodding. I had to ask again. There is a lot of echo. And then in the fourth example that I brought, she does the same thing, but whereas in the first time she just says to the Spanish-speaking participant, I don't hear you very well, she also conveys to her that there is a lot of echo, so that the Spanish-speaking participant also understands why she doesn't hear her very well. So I just brought these examples because I wanted to show you that, like, sometimes the interpreters, they feel their professional phase is threatened, and they have to give like this this justification of why they have to ask for clarification. And also in the interview afterwards with this interpreter, she said something similar. She said, "I found it very annoying, and I also felt annoyed. That's why I tried to defend myself a bit. I think I just wanted to make clear that it was a technical issue, which is annoying for everyone, but which is not something I could do anything about." So she really felt this need to like defend her own professional integrity and not not make the others think that maybe she wasn't capable as an interpreter, or her Spanish wasn't good enough or something like that. So that's just one of the many examples that of rapport management that came out of this these 4 conversations basically. And I wanted to show it to you to make this a bit more concrete. So that was the pilot itself. What do we want to do with the things that we got from the pilot? Well, we got some ideas and some remarks, obviously, on some methodological things and some technical, practical things as well. And we applied some changes to the experiment design based on those issues. And then we wanted to conduct the actual experiments, which is something that we've been doing the past month. We started at the beginning of March to conduct the experiments, and this time we did it with 12 interpreters, and we're almost there. We did 10 already. There's 2 to go, and the pilot has been really useful in informing us about the way in which we wanted to set up this experiment and what the information that we wanted to get from it. So that was it. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
If someone has questions, we have time for a quick one. Okay.
Hi, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Well, I think especially for me because, as you know, we are quite a few people who are interested in multimodal approach. I'm not sure if it's going to be a quick question, though. So you said that you've run the pilot so far and you have 12 interpreters as the main cohort. You mean 12 interpreters in remote settings, or 12 interpreters who are going to run both on-site and online?
Both. So each interpreter is asked to do both. So they all do 2 settings. So we want 24 conversations in the end.
Okay, okay. Thank you. And I also wanted to ask, because you mentioned at the very beginning that you would like to investigate also the nonverbal report management strategies. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you define them on the nonverbal level?
Yeah, sure. It can be like many different things. Everything that's being used to manage interpersonal relations in some way. It can be nodding, like we saw the service provider do. It can be smiles. It can be the way in which you position your body. Everything that's non-verbal and that can be linked to the management of interpersonal relations in the instances that we have determined will be considered as non-verbal behavior that might contribute to the management of interpersonal relations.
And are you going to come up with a kind of a list of strategies, or are you going to analyze it qualitatively on a case-to-case basis?
I think the idea, well, it's going to be a qualitative analysis obviously at first, but then we're going to try and make some kind of a categorization based on all the different analyses that we made. And also we made some kind of a categorization beforehand, but since there wasn't really a lot of input that we got for the non-verbal part, the categorization that we made beforehand was mainly verbal.
Okay, and perhaps last question, I think it's quite technical, but I understand the setup for the on-site experiments, that the whole 3 participants were seated at the same table. And did you have issues with people keeping their hands under the table? Because this is something I get a lot, even though you think you're controlling for everything. Suddenly you have people who gesture under the table, and even though you kept the upper body on camera, there's a part of communication, or there's a part of behavior, etc., at least, that is not caught on camera anymore, which is, I think, an issue you didn't have for the online recordings, because you had 2 viewpoints, right?
Yeah.
From the main camera and from the camera from profile view.
I haven't been able to look at all the data that we got for the actual experiment, but I haven't really encountered in the data from the pilot experiment, I haven't really seen any participants who had their hands under the table and therefore had made some gestures that we maybe didn't see. But that's indeed why we had the different angles for the online one, because we knew that some gestures were made like under the visible video, and that's why we had the different angles.
Yes, I see. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are going for the final presentation of this session. It is by Leonardo Doria de Souza. Leonardo is the Senior Advisor at the Norwegian Directorate of Integration and Diversity, which is the Norwegian Authority on Public Service Interpreting. He's going to deliver the presentation entitled Raising Awareness on the Use of Video Remote Interpreting.
Muchas gracias, Raquel. Muchas gracias, Carmen, por la invitación y por la oportunidad de presentar el trabajo que hacemos con la interpretación de video a distancia en Noruega. And that's all I can say in Spanish. I'm sorry. Now I'm going over to English. Well, I'm a senior advisor at the Norwegian Directorate of Integration and Diversity, which is the national authority on public service interpreting in Norway. It means that we work with several measures in order to develop the field. Some of the measures that we and the areas that we work are here. We work in order to increase the use of qualified interpreters in the public sector. We fund and realize research projects on the field. We fund training and qualification measures at a certain level for interpreters at Oslo Metropolitan University, Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, and the Sami University of Applied Sciences. So we have in Norway 3 educational institutions now qualifying interpreters. We are also responsible for the National Register of Interpreters. Since 2005, we have a National Register of Interpreters in Norway. I'll come back to that. And since 1st January 2022, we have been working in order to support and advise on the implementation of the Interpreting Act. And I have also chose some of the sustainable goals of the United Nations in order to link our activities to these goals. Here you see some main figures for the field of public service interpreting in Norway. In 2021, we're still working with the numbers for 2022, but in 2021 we have had 780,000 assignments and around 75 million euros spent on interpreting services. And our data shows that for the time being, or in 2021, 60% of all the interpreting assignments in the public service in Norway has been realized by qualified interpreters. So we still have a way to go in order to reach 100%, which is the goal of the Interpreting Act. For the matter of this presentation, it's important also to show some figures about how these interpreting assignments are done in Norway. We see that 22% are on-site assignments. Telephone is around 73%, while in 2021 we have had only 5% of the assignments done by video remote interpreting. And it's a bit strange because, as mentioned before as well, we experienced an increase of on the number of video remote interpreting assignments during the pandemics. But right after that, the number decreased again. So for 2021, we had, as I mentioned, around 5%. But we see that the numbers for 2022 are even lower and about 2%. So the number is, the share is actually decreasing. But we choose to see this as a big opportunity in order to promote more use of video remote interpreting. In the National Register of Interpreters in 2022, we have around 2,245 listings in 79 languages. I mentioned the Interpreting Act, and perhaps some of you have already heard about it. It's a great achievement for the field of public service interpreting, for the rights of minority language speakers in Norway. Two sections of the Interpreting Act that are important for this presentation. The Section 7, which states the requirement to use a qualified interpreter when a public body is obligated to use an interpreter pursuant to Section 6, blah, 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 blah. A qualified interpreter shall be used, and a qualified interpreter is an interpreter from the National Register of Interpreters. It means that a person or interpreter has been through the training education or the training measures that we have in Norway. There is an encouragement also in the Interpreting Act in order to use or to increase the use of remote interpreting. On Section 8, it states that public bodies may use on-site interpreting or remote interpreting. When using remote interpreting, public bodies shall ensure that satisfactory technical solutions are in place, that staff are adequately trained, and that personal data are protected. So already in 2021, we started a campaign in order to find more about the use of video remote interpreting in the public service in Norway and what is needed to increase the use as a better solution for first and foremost telephone interpreting, but also when it's possible as a substitute for on-site assignments. And we wanted to see the use of video remote interpreting as an effective and enthusiastic use of interpreting services through video platforms. It's not very often that you see the word enthusiastic coming from a civil servant, but we tried. We want then to increase the number of assignments using VRI. We want the minority language speaker, the interpreter, and the civil servant experience to be as good as to be a good one and a trustworthy one. Users of video remote interpreting feel that they are aware and know how to handle the challenges that may appear during an assignment. So these were the goals that we had for this campaign or for this work. In order to find out how to deal with this and how to reach these goals, we set up several groups of stakeholders. We had mixed groups with interpreters. We had mixed groups with interpreter users. We had also a group with municipalities and also with the educational institutions. So we had also groups only for interpreters with different backgrounds, both regionally and also when it comes to the qualifications that they have. And we also had a larger reference group where we kind of mixed the different stakeholders. This is in order to give us the best possible background in order to develop the measures to meet our goals. What we did after interview and after having the reference groups, we divided the areas of actions in 4. We saw a need for establishing a standard for all involved parts on a VRI situation, and we wanted that all involved parts should know what to do and what to expect from each other, and what not to do and what not to expect from each other. So it has been very important for us also to set some limits based on the feedback that we got both from interpreters and from users of interpreting services. Another action area that we saw also as very important was to improve interpreters' working conditions. Not only regarding the use of equipment, but also in order to deal with mental and physical stress during VRI assignments. The other 2 areas of action are regarding to technology in order to map reliable equipment and softwares for the best VRI experience. And we see also the need of more research and development in the field of VRI, increased awareness and knowledge management and best practices. So these are the 4 areas that we kind of divided our measures, the measures that we will work for the years to come. We have already started. I'm not sure you can read what it says there, but these are the set of measures that we have defined for the period of this project. Already since the second half of 2021, we have concluded many measures. Also in 2022, and now we're working with 6-7 different measures. And for the future, for the next 12 and 18 months, there are also different measures. And as you see, the colors represent also the different action areas. So what we see is that there is a big lack of information when it comes to the use of VRI in Norway. We have had several attempts earlier, which we have failed mainly because the technology wasn't good enough. So most of the times that people would like or would try to use video remote interpreting, they would have a bad experience. So this is something that imposes a very big challenge for us when we see that now good technology is much more available. But in the same time, and as I mentioned before, it's very important for us also not to market VRI as the perfect solution, because it's not. This is something that we are very aware of, and when it comes to the measures that we have applied already, we are very clear in order to define some limits. So some of the measures that we have already done are 3 different information videos, 2 for interpreters, 1 regarding the physical and mental health of interpreters when they have the possibility of having much more assignments during a day, because they're only sitting at their home office and using video technology, but they have to be aware of the effects of using video remote interpreting technology. We have another one which is about the equipment and facilities that you should have at your home office. We have also a video. These videos are around 2.5 minutes, information videos. The third one is for civil servants, in order to give them information and give them knowledge about how to deal with video remote interpreting assignments on the best possible way. We have a short 1-page guide about roles and responsibilities for both interpreters and civil servants. We have a series of articles at IMDI's webpage. And this year we're launching an e-learning on video remote interpreting, which has civil servants, qualified interpreters, and interpreters without formal training on VRI as target groups. The main themes of the e-learning are roles and responsibilities, challenges and advantages, and physical and mental stress factors, and equipment and facilities. And the e-learning is has a duration of around 70 minutes. How much time do I have, Raquel? Okay, nothing. Because here you see the links. The links are available, as I mentioned, at imd.no. And of course, you can have access to this presentation as well. So thank you for your attention. I had actually 2 of the videos here that I really wanted to show to the people here. So this is the one that unfortunately they are in Norwegian. This is a very short one, which is the one that we're using in order to marketing the whole pack of information that we're going to marketing now from March and onwards. So let me see. So this is the shortest one. This is, as I mentioned, the one that is going to marketing the whole package of information. And it's a very easy just saying that, okay, it's the best solution is to have an interpreter on site, but if this is not possible, then you should try video remote interpreting. But I think that if you have any questions, I think that would be better than showing everything that I have done. I think it's better to try to answer your questions if you have any.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I would like to ask if, well, I would like to congratulate you on providing some resources for maintaining the mental health of the interpreters. Are you offering other possibilities, like some courses, some trainings rather than videos, to help them manage the mental load of the interpreting assignments?
Yeah. Oslo Metropolitan University and the Western Norway University College, they have courses of 30 ECTS, or 15 or 30 ECTS, which are aimed on the use of remote interpreting. So this is actually what we want interpreters to choose. So this is also one of the main goals of the e-learning program, is to make interpreters go further and take a more formal qualification. But until then we want them to try this e-learning. And we also know that there are some offers also aimed at civil servants, at least at the Oslo Metropolitan University.
Thank you, Leo, for being so enthusiastic. There are enthusiastic civil servants, as you said, but picking up on that, you also mentioned we are going to market this. In other words, there is a perceived need at your end, but the question is, what about the target audience? Do they also perceive the need to the same extent as you? Because you can make many of these videos about Shem, Tolkien, which is great, but the question is, how do you get people convinced to actually watch them And I do hope that many will be doing that, but I think that's what we are all struggling with. Many of us are trying to educate public service providers themselves, but if you want to raise awareness among them, first you need to raise awareness that they need this awareness raising.
Yeah, no, this is a big challenge, Lifen, indeed. And we're going to spend some money in order to try to reach around 700,000 civil servants in Norway that could be potential users of interpreting services and video remote interpreting users. The statistics show that they do prefer the use of remote interpreting by telephone. So this is actually a challenge for us in order to make them understand that in the same way that they're using video communication on their everyday work and other on their normal tasks at their office, we need also to make them believe that, okay, there is an opportunity to get a better interpreting assignment or interpreting service if I use video remote interpreting. So this is what we have ahead of us, and I hope we'll succeed. I'll let you know.
And will you be aiming for everyone from high to low, or, or will you also have an approach whereby you first try to convince those at the top and then hope for a trickle-down effect?
In the directorate, we have existing channels that are used by other groups in our organization, and we are going to try to go through these established channels in order to meet first and foremost civil servants at the low level, the ones that are using interpreting services, but we also have the possibility of meeting the leadership of different public offices in order to make them also work or cooperate with us in order to make this information more available. And actually, this is something that is very special. Our director, it's a very big supporter of video remote interpreting. This is something that we have to use very strategically as well.
Okay. Perhaps we can continue the question and answer session in front of a cup of coffee. Thank you very much. Thank you to the presenters and the audience. Solamente te voy a decir una cosa muy breve. Tu horario de trabajo no empieza a las 11 de la noche, ¿no?
Bueno, sí que encender el micrófono. Buenas tardes, vamos a comenzar el último panel del Congreso. Os doy las gracias porque somos poquitos, en la última hora estamos aquí, sobre todo gracias también a los ponentes. Vamos a comenzar con la presentación de la comunicación de Cristina Cano y yo misma, que somos las autoras. Cada uno de los ponentes vaya a tener 20 minutos y dedicaremos el final para el turno de preguntas, ¿de acuerdo? Bueno, mi compañera Cristina Cano es miembro del grupo FITISPOS de Formación e Investigación en Traducción e Interpretación en los Servicios Públicos, donde está realizando su tesis doctoral. Sus líneas de investigación están relacionadas con las tecnologías de la traducción en los contextos migratorios y además trabaja como especialista en traducción automática en la empresa Acolat. Yo me presento muy brevemente, mi nombre es María del Mar, soy docente investigadora de aquí de la Universidad de Alcalá y formo parte también del grupo de investigación FITISPOS. Cuando quieras, Cristina.
¿Está encendido? Sí. Vale. Vale, pues bueno, como ha dicho Mar, esta es nuestra presentación que se llama Predicción de la comunicación en las ONG. Y bueno, lo que queríamos un poco era realzar el papel que siempre tienen obviamente los traductores humanos en cualquier tipo de tecnología de la traducción. Entonces, bueno, muy brevemente, este es nuestro índice para hoy. Primero queremos hacer un poco una visión general sobre qué son las guías de preedición, bueno, partiendo obviamente de la problemática que tenemos y por qué pensamos que la tecnología podría ayudar en este contexto. Entonces, bueno, eso, iremos sobre qué son las guías de preedición, luego un poco sobre las ONG y sus tipologías textuales, las que hemos elegido en concreto para este tema, luego la metodología que hemos seguido para este estudio, algunos resultados y, por último, unas conclusiones. Y bueno, al final hay una diapositiva por si queréis hacerle una foto con algunas referencias también que han servido para redactar este estudio. Vale, pues empezamos un poco con la problemática, con el contexto general que tenemos hoy en día, y es que bueno, partimos de la base de que obviamente las ONGs son unas organizaciones que están muy presentes a la orden del día hoy en día, perdón por la redundancia, que bueno, siempre están facilitando la comunicación y rompiendo esas barreras lingüísticas que desgraciadamente seguimos viendo cada vez más con las situaciones que estamos viviendo en cuanto a contextos migratorios, en cuanto a crisis naturales, en cuanto, bueno, ahora la situación de guerra que hemos vivido en este último año. Siempre están ahí para facilitar esta comunicación y sobre todo ayudar a estas minorías. Por tanto, partimos de la base de que tienen un papel muy destacado en nuestra sociedad. ¿Qué pasa? Que en toda situación hay una problemática y una de las grandes problemáticas a las que se enfrentan estas ONGs es la escasez de recursos económicos, porque muchas veces no tienen esta subvención que nos gustaría, ¿no?, para que pudieran contar con todos los recursos que quisieran. Entonces, bueno, la falta de recurso económico lleva también a una falta de recurso tecnológico. Esto hace que las tecnologías de la traducción y en mayor medida las tecnologías en general, no están realmente muy implantadas en estas ONG en cuanto a sus flujos de trabajo, ¿no? Esto, por tanto, dificulta esta implementación de la tecnología. Entonces, bueno, esto por un lado en cuanto a las ONGs, pero también en el ámbito académico y en el ámbito industrial de esta industria de la traducción, cada vez más, como todos sabemos, las tecnologías pues, están teniendo un papel más y más importante. Entonces, bueno, muchos investigadores en los últimos años lo que han ido haciendo es ver cómo esta tecnología, que ya surtía efecto en otros campos por ejemplo, yo qué sé, pues en el campo económico, en el campo incluso médico, en otro tipo de campos, cómo podría esta tecnología de la que ya se beneficiarse también las ONGs y el contexto social. Entonces, bueno, principalmente nuestra investigación se basa en la traducción automática y todo lo que tiene que ver con esta, y en este caso con las guías de preedición. Entonces, bueno, a través de todos estos estudios y de nuestra investigación que ya está en marcha, estamos demostrando un poco la necesidad de integrar esta tecnología en este contexto. Muy brevemente, ¿qué son las guías de preedición? Porque quizás os suenen qué son las guías de posedición, que básicamente es luego poseditar un texto ya traducido por traducción automática. Entonces, bueno, aquí le damos un poco la vuelta y entonces, en vez de centrarnos en el texto después de pasar por traducción automática, aquí nos estamos centrando en el texto antes. Entonces, bueno, las guías de preedición, la preedición en sí, consiste en mejorar el texto original antes de pasarlo por un motor de traducción automática. Entonces, bueno, ¿cómo mejoramos el texto original? Hay investigadores que se han basado en hacer estas reglas de preedición para que el traductor humano o el lingüista o la persona que vaya a realizar esta preedición sea capaz de centrarse en un punto o en otro, ¿no? No hacerlo de forma aleatoria, sino más bien ir siguiendo unas pautas. Normalmente casi todas las guías que existen de preedición se han centrado en aspectos terminológicos, estilísticos y sobre todo en hacer las frases originales más breves. O sea, no extendernos demasiado ni hacer así una sintaxis muy enrevesada, sino más bien hacer las frases y oraciones más breves. Entonces, bueno, este texto ya mejorado ya pasaría al motor de traducción automática, que bueno, como sabéis, podría ser basado en reglas, un sistema también estadístico o el que está a la orden del día, un sistema de traducción neuronal, automática neuronal. Y por último, la posedición, ¿no? Que es de lo que hablábamos antes, que es después de haber pasado por este motor de traducción automática. Aquí es donde volvería a entrar, obviamente, la colaboración entre la máquina y el humano, porque siempre tiene que haber un poseditor humano que sea capaz de validar y valorar esa traducción realizada automáticamente por el motor. Muy brevemente también, como acabo de comentar, la preedición se ha basado un poco en los distintos tipos de sistemas que ya existían para traducción automática. Entonces, bueno, están la basada en reglas, la traducción automática estadística y la traducción automática neuronal. Entonces, Mercader Alarcón y Sánchez Martínez, en su estudio del 2016, se centraron en la traducción automática basada en reglas. Entonces, bueno, demostraron que esta preedición y estas guías de preedición era muy útil porque estos sistemas de traducción automática basados en reglas, al basarse en reglas, repiten errores muy recurrentes. Entonces, claro, si en las guías definíamos unas pautas basándonos exactamente en esos errores recurrentes, era muy fácil corregir el texto original. Entonces funcionaba muchísimo mejor con este tipo de motor de traducción automática. Luego, con la traducción automática estadística, un estudio muy interesante de Seretan et al. Decía que bueno, las guías de predicción sobre el texto original también eran muy útil porque se demostraba que los lingüistas que habían utilizado estas guías de preedición y habían poseditado un texto previamente preeditado, tardaban menos tiempo en luego hacer la posedición que un lingüista que se enfrentaba al texto original sin edición, ¿no? El texto original tal cual. Y luego, más recientemente, en cuanto a la traducción automática neuronal, algunos investigadores como Hiroaki Yamada o Miyata y Fujita dicen que la preedición es muy útil, pero no siempre. O sea, según el tipo de reglas que se apliquen. Antes estaba muy claro que en la traducción automática basada en reglas, si nos centrábamos siempre en el mismo tipo de error, era muy fácil corregir el texto original. Con la traducción automática estadística, en menor medida, pero igualmente, si nos basábamos siempre en el mismo tipo de errores, era muy fácil también luego poseditar. Y sin embargo, con la traducción automática neuronal, hay que ver qué tipo de cambios introducimos en el texto original para que luego realmente sea efectivo, porque al final tampoco queremos preeditar absolutamente cualquier segmento si realmente luego no nos va a aportar ningún valor en cuanto a la posedición, ¿no? Porque obviamente el objetivo es agilizar la tarea del poseditor. También, brevemente, solamente queríamos mencionar que existen dos tipos de preedición. No sé si estabais familiarizados con la preedición en sí, pero bueno, existen dos tipos, una la monolingüe y otra la bilingüe. La monolingüe se basa básicamente en preeditar el texto original sin tener en cuenta ningún tipo de traducción de referencia. O sea, tal cual tenemos el texto original y se preedita este texto. Esto puede tener ventaja, por ejemplo, si no se conoce la lengua meta, y no se tiene conocimiento de esa lengua meta a la que se va a poseditar, simplemente preeditando el texto original y teniendo un conocimiento de este texto, de la lengua del texto original, se podría realizar esta preedición. Y, sin embargo, la preedición bilingüe se basa básicamente en hacer esta misma preedición, pero en vez de teniendo solo en cuenta el texto original, teniendo también en cuenta el texto de referencia, ¿no? El texto que luego queremos ver realmente la diferencia entre si merece la pena o no merece la pena la preedición. Queríamos añadir aquí las guías que se han publicado recientemente. Bueno, es un estudio del año pasado, acabando el año pasado, de Sánchez Gijón y de Kenny, en un libro que tienen sobre posedición y traducción automática. Y bueno, estas autoras básicamente recogen todas las reglas de preedición que se habían ido haciendo hasta ahora y las resumen y las agrupan en estos tres bloques. Por lo tanto, nos parecía bastante un estudio de referencia para poder seguir luego en nuestro ejercicio práctico estos bloques. Entonces, bueno, ellas en las reglas léxicas, como dije en el principio, normalmente se han basado en terminología, estilo y luego en frases cortas, y aquí ellas se basan en los mismos bloques, en terminología o reglas léxicas, en reglas de estilo y luego en elementos referenciales, que podríamos incluirlos un poco en la sintaxis, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, en las reglas léxicas pues tienen que se eviten cambios de estilo, ¿no? Que no se titubee mucho entre tratar de tú y de usted, por ejemplo, evitar abreviaciones, las que son más claras, pues bueno, hoy en día no tienen por qué ser ningún problema, pero algunas que son un poco más extrañas, pues sí que si se evitan estas abreviaciones, la traducción automática leerá mucho mejor ese texto original. También las palabras redundantes y, por supuesto, los sinónimos, porque cuantas más palabras sinónimas introduzcamos dentro del mismo segmento o del mismo párrafo, más lío le vamos a causar a ese motor de traducción automática para luego darnos una traducción de calidad. Esto en cuanto a las reglas léxicas. Luego, en cuanto a las estructurales y de estilo, pues bueno, un poco lo que venimos comentando, ¿no? Que las oraciones no sean excesivamente largas, que no haya esta redundancia ni estas florituras que hacemos mucho, por ejemplo, en español, ¿no? Intentando como meter muchísimos conectores que realmente a la hora de un texto original muchas veces no hace falta y lo único que hace es meter más ruido en cuanto a la traducción automática. Entonces, bueno, pues eso, evitar un poco, mantener este estilo siempre el mismo, evitar las redundancias y, bueno, también las oraciones pasivas es algo que no funciona muy bien con traducción automática y se podría tener en cuenta. Y luego, en cuanto a elementos referenciales, pues lo mismo. Por ejemplo, el español es un idioma en el que evita mucho el empleo de sujetos omitidos o incluso elementos omitidos. Y bueno, si evitamos que haya este tipo de omisiones, también el motor de traducción automática nos lo agradecerá y hará una traducción mucho más limpia. Luego, un estudio, bueno, el estudio que hemos mencionado anteriormente sobre traducción automática de Hiroaka y Yamada, creo que es, se centran exclusivamente en la traducción automática neuronal. Y entonces, estos autores dicen que más que centrarse en reescribir las oraciones para que sean más cortas, más sencillas, o sea, más que centrarnos en el aspecto sintáctico, que lo más importante para que funcione bien un texto preeditado con traducción automática neuronal es la puntuación, los elementos referenciales, es decir, las omisiones que acabamos de mencionar, y también los nombres propios y las abreviaciones, que queden muy claro, que no se acorten, y esto funciona muchísimo mejor para preeditar un texto y luego pasarlo por un motor de traducción automática neuronal que cualquier otro tipo de preedición. Vale, yendo al grano, ¿por qué las ONG y sus tipologías textuales? Hemos escogido para este estudio un informe y una nota de prensa, básicamente porque son textos recurrentes, por lo tanto podrían ser bastante de ayuda para las ONG si deciden implementar este tipo de tecnología, y además tienen una función informativa y apelativa, por lo que también nos da pie a poder implementar estas guías de preedición, ya que normalmente tienen muchas oraciones que podríamos simplificar. Muy bien. Entonces, en la metodología, como venía diciendo, hemos escogido una nota de prensa y un informe. Entonces, en la nota de prensa contábamos con la versión bilingüe en inglés y con la versión en español. Entonces, en este caso teníamos dos textos disponibles, el original y la traducción de referencia. Por si queréis luego echarle un vistazo. Estoy siendo enrollada. grabando. Ay, pobres. Bueno, un desafío para ellos. Se está entendiendo todo súper claro. Gracias. Vale. Vale. Que ha sido la alarma de incendios, pero que no pasa nada, que podemos seguir, que lo han dicho desde la centralita. Lo siento, continuamos desde aquí. Ya prometo que a partir de aquí quedan pocas cosas. Bueno, pues eso. El primer texto que escogimos fue la nota de prensa y, como iba diciendo, en este caso teníamos la referencia tanto del texto original, obviamente, como de la traducción en sí, ¿vale? Estaban los dos publicados, aquí están los links por si le queréis echar un vistazo. Todos los textos que hemos cogido eran de problemáticas actuales, nada de años pasados. Este, por ejemplo, es de febrero de este año. En cuanto al informe, también era una problemática actual, este no pasa de moda, porque era sobre el cambio climático, y en este caso solo teníamos la versión disponible en inglés. En español solo estaba el resumen. Entonces, bueno, en este caso solamente jugábamos con el texto original. Es por eso que hemos hecho una preedición monolingüe en ambos casos, ¿vale? Porque como de este no teníamos la referencia, hemos querido mantener la igualdad de condiciones y entonces hemos hecho una preedición siempre monolingüe. Para nuestras guías de preedición hemos cogido el modelo que decía antes de Sánchez, Gijón y Kenny y básicamente hemos adoptado lo que está subrayado en negrita, porque es lo que nos decían los otros autores que realmente tenía sentido a la hora de preeditar un texto para la traducción automática neuronal. Y bueno, no lo voy a mencionar porque ahora lo vamos a ver con ejemplos, pero aquí lo tenéis. Esta es la metodología que hemos seguido muy brevemente. Hemos traducido con traducción automática los dos textos originales con DeepL. Hemos poseditado el informe para tener una versión de referencia para luego hacer una métrica automática. Luego preeditamos ambos textos, como he dicho, de forma monolingüe. Se pasó por traducción automática esa versión ya preeditada de los textos y luego se hizo una comparación entre las propuestas para realmente ver cuáles eran los resultados, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, aquí tenemos algunos ejemplos. Este es de la nota de prensa y, bueno, como podéis ver en negrita hay 4 columnas. La primera columna es el texto original antes de la preedición y su traducción automática, o sea, sin preeditar, tal cual. Y luego el texto original preeditado con su traducción automática de ese texto ya preeditado, ¿vale? Entonces, bueno, en este caso, como podéis ver, aplicamos el desarrollo de abreviaciones. Aquí también más ejemplos de desarrollo de abreviaciones. En este caso, puntuación. Aquí oraciones de gerundio, intentamos darle un poco la vuelta a la oración para que sea más sencilla de leer y de digerir por el motor de traducción automática. En este caso igual, tratamos siempre de evitar los verbos en ing en inglés, sino pasarlo más bien a un tiempo presente. Aquí también intentamos siempre evitar los elementos referenciales y los sujetos elípticos. En este caso igual, también cambiamos un poco la frase de orden para que tuviera más sentido para la traducción automática. Aquí también desarrollamos, este ya es el informe, antes era la nota de prensa, pero bueno, las reglas de preedición han sido las mismas para los dos tipos de texto, así que básicamente han sido iguales. En este caso, por ejemplo, también decidimos que la terminología fuera consistente y, como veis, utilizan indistintivamente en el texto original los sinónimos profundo, devastador y extremo. Y bueno, por frecuencia de uso, en el texto preeditado preferimos utilizar siempre el sinónimo profundo en inglés. Entonces, luego no había esas inconsistencias léxicas en el texto ya traducido después de preeditar. Estos siguen siendo cambios de puntuación. Como vamos un poco falta de tiempo, no me paro, pero si luego alguien está interesado en los ejemplos, nos puede escribir sin problema y le podemos mandar las diapositivas. También esto siempre evitando los sujetos elípticos. Y bueno, a modo resumen, que sepáis que para la nota de prensa contábamos con estos 4 textos, o sea, el texto original, la traducción automática después de la preedición y el texto de referencia para ahora hacer el análisis de los resultados. Y entonces, como podemos ver aquí, es una tabla en la que hemos puesto los resultados de métricas automáticas para ver cuánto de parecido tenían entre una versión y la otra. Entonces, esta comparación es simplemente entre la traducción automática y el texto de referencia, o sea, sin nada de predicción, el texto original con traducción automática y la versión de referencia. Y bueno, básicamente lo que significa la primera columna son los rangos de porcentaje. Lo que nos interesa es la primera y la segunda columna, porque como vemos, en el 100% de rango de porcentaje solamente había un segmento que era igual. Si vamos bajando, vamos viendo pues, que, por ejemplo, 13 de los segmentos se parecían entre un 90 y un 99%. Y así, ¿no? Vamos bajando hasta que llegamos al último, que es 5 segmentos se diferenciaban completamente, porque eran más diferentes del 50%, o sea, diferían más de un 50%. Y bueno, la distancia total era de un 81%. Esta era la cantidad en la que se parecían estas dos versiones. Sin embargo, cuando hacemos la misma comparación, pero con el texto original ya preeditado, vemos que la distancia es menor. O sea, el poseditor tuvo que poseditar menos después de haber tenido el texto original con esa preedición. Con el informe pasaba exactamente lo mismo, lo que pasa es que en vez de la traducción de referencia teníamos la versión poseditada que mencioné al principio. Y en este caso igual, si solamente miramos la traducción automática y la versión poseditada sin guías de preedición, estamos diciendo que los textos se parecían en casi un 89%, y sin embargo, después de la preedición se parecían, eran prácticamente idénticos, como veis en el primer rango, 46 segmentos de 87 eran completamente iguales entre la traducción automática y entre la posedición final, porque al haberse preeditado el texto original, estaban completamente bien traducidos por el motor de traducción automática. Claro que partimos de la base que estamos hablando de un motor de traducción automática neuronal y, volvemos a decir, eran textos sencillos y textos informativos. Y bueno, para terminar ya, algunas conclusiones y algunas mejoras futuras sobre todo. Mejoras futuras, pues que había más abreviaturas en la nota de prensa y había más oraciones redundantes en el informe. No lo supimos hasta que no nos pusimos a analizar los textos originales, pero realmente sería interesante tener esta información para proyectos futuros y a lo mejor centrarnos un poco más en las características de cada texto. Luego, como iba diciendo, el motor de traducción automática neuronal ya hace un buen trabajo. No nos hemos parado mucho, pero, por ejemplo, no había tanta diferencia en cuanto a desarrollar una abreviatura y no desarrollarla. O sea, realmente el motor de traducción automática nos daba el mismo resultado, con preedición y sin preedición. Sí que hemos intentado, o deberíamos haber intentado más en el texto original, que era siempre inglés, no poner tantos adverbios que luego pudieran traducirse como adverbios acabados en mente, porque es verdad que mete un poco de ruido y quita un poco la fluidez en el texto en español. Entonces, bueno, quizás para el futuro tener eso más en cuenta y cambiar algunas palabras por sinónimos más sencillos, porque aunque intentamos, como he enseñado antes, el ejemplo de profundo, aunque intentamos seguir esa pauta, no siempre se ha hecho y debería haberse hecho con más cautela para realmente ayudar más al motor de traducción automática. Y bueno, ya como conclusiones finales, realmente pensamos que esto podría ser un beneficio para las ONGs porque les permitiría traducir mucha cantidad de información en poco tiempo. Obviamente vuelvo a hacer hincapié en que no todos los tipos de texto pueden pasarse por traducción automática, pero los que sí fueran sencillos y los que sí fueran recurrentes, como por ejemplo estas notas de prensa, sí podrían ser bastante de ayuda. Esto les haría tener una mayor rapidez en su flujo de trabajo con la ayuda de la preedición, aparte de la traducción automática, y la posedición, que muchos ya usan. Y también, bueno, pues que como ya hemos visto en las tablas de resultados, que realmente existía muchísimo más parecido entre las versiones con el ya texto original preeditado y la posedición final que con el texto sin preeditar. Por lo tanto, demostramos que sí que ayuda, aunque no en una medida gigante, porque la traducción automática neuronal es lo suficientemente buena, pero sí que ayuda a a mejorar esta calidad y esta posedición para los poseditores finales. Y bueno, pues para el futuro también nos gustaría quizá probar si esto funciona o no con diferentes tipologías, quizá introducir alguna un poco más especializada. También estos segmentos eran muy pequeños, entonces quizás analizar un mayor volumen y por tanto utilizar un mayor número de poseditores. Y por último, pues nos gustaría hacer hincapié en que las tecnologías de la traducción pues ya llevan aquí un tiempo y lo único que podemos hacer es seguir trabajando con ellas, seguir mejorándolas y en vez de dejarlas de lado, intentar unirnos a ellas como humanos y tener claro que ni ellas, bueno, ellas no son nada sin nosotros. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Cristina. Vamos a pasar a la segunda ponencia. La segunda ponencia la dará Verónica Alarcón García, es licenciada en Comunicación con máster en Traducción Creativa y Humanística por la Universidad de Valencia, intérprete inglés-español en los Servicios Públicos de Emergencia de la Generalitat Valenciana y actualmente ejerce su carrera como docente, investigadora y coordinadora académica del grado en Traducción e Interpretación en la Universidad Internacional de Valencia. Cuando quiera.
Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon. My name is Veronica and I'm here by accident. And I just say that because my experience and my research career started and continue at the emergency setting. That's why I always joke about that. Anyway, today I would like to talk to you about telephone interpreting and mediation in the Valencian Public Emergency Services. With this presentation, I would like to share my personal experience and some research carried out in the public emergency services of the Valencian government in Spain, that is the 112 Comunitat Valenciana. Well, with this time that we're going to spend together, I'll try to provide answers to some questions related to accessibility and inclusion of speakers of other languages or of foreign languages to this public emergency service and the way communication flows are actually managed in order to ensure effective communication. So what's the context? 112 Comunitat Valenciana is the public emergency line and was launched 24 years ago in our region. Since then, the service has played a fundamental role providing a rapid response in emergency situations. The emergency call center in this region manages emergency calls requiring healthcare, public safety, civil protection, firefighting, and rescue. The call center is located here in Valencia and in Leliana, in a town called Leliana in Valencia, and receives emergency calls made to the telephone number 112 within the limits of the Mediterranean region, that is Castellón, Valencia, and Alicante. It's a total of 3 provinces of Spain. So there are specific regulations in Europe, Spain, and the Valencian community that set the standards for the creation and management of the 112 service, including how accessibility and inclusion are guaranteed for speakers of other languages with the sole objective of protecting the population when required, basically when their life is at risk. So the first step to ensure protection, accessibility, and inclusion of all users, regardless of the language of origin, was actually taken back in 1991 with the Council Decision 91/396/ECC. And please allow me to quote, "Member states will have to devote efforts to easing difficulties of comprehension which may arise from different language capabilities." In 2018, the Directive 2018/1972 of the European Parliament and of the Council stated that member states should consider the public safety answering point's ability to handle emergency communications in more than one language. And this applies all across Europe. In more than one language, just remember that data. In Spain, we've got the Spanish Royal Decree 903/1997 of 16 June. And this decree expressly attributed the provision of the public emergency answering service to the autonomous regions, which are obliged, it is mandatory, to establish the corresponding emergency call reception centers and the necessary telecommunications networks following European guidelines. Here's a map of the 17 autonomous communities in Spain, and each one has their own emergency coordination center with their own rules, with their own structure, with their own protocols. Of course, they've got stuff in common, but the Royal Decree gives the regions total autonomy to create the public emergency services following European guidelines. Following the guidelines from the European Commission and the Spanish decree, the Generalitat Valenciana founded the Public Emergency Service in the Mediterranean region back in 1999. Nowadays, the service is regulated within the framework of these two codes. Special attention is given to the flow of information between callers and call takers within this setting. And since it is imperative that the service be accessible to all citizens in the territory of the Valencian community, free of charge, and providing a multilingual service. And this is interesting because here comes the interpretation of the Valencian government of the European guidelines, remember? Ability to handle emergency communications in more than one language. Let's see what the Valencian government did with this. The emergency telephone service 112 Comunitat Valenciana is to be provided not only in the two official languages of the region, but also in the main languages of the EU. So the Valencian interpretation of the European guidelines attempted to accommodate the needs of citizens, resulting in a service provided in 5 different languages. That is Spanish, Valencian, English, German, and French. In 2022, only 3.1 million calls were handled in any of those 5 languages. And since the service was established in 1999, 81 million inquiries have been received, inquiries for help. Ultimately, these figures clearly demonstrate the consolidation as the public emergency service in the Valencian region. In 2022, out of the 3.1 incoming calls, 931,596 resulted in incidents that could be classified within the emergency catalog, whereof 20,307 were handled in the main EU languages. 15,473 calls were managed in English, which represents 76% of the calls received in foreign languages. So, with these numbers in mind, the capability of the Emergency Coordination Center, the ability of this center to receive requests for help in other European languages, on site, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year is unquestionable. We're going to talk about how the communication is handled because it's worth taking a look at that. This is the call reception room. Here we can see the different working stations. You could also see me on the cover. You can have an idea of how busy we are. In this call reception center, qualified staff deal with real emergencies. Real emergencies. Their job is to collect the caller's demands and process the information to establish precisely where and what type of emergency is occurring. Likewise, the 112 call takers determine through established operating procedures which agencies are involved in the resolution of the emergency. When we talk about agencies, we refer to police, firefighters, and health stations. And then we transfer the information obtained to the different ERT, emergency response teams, that is the paramedics, the security bodies, or firefighters that are on our streets. Before we move any further, I'm gonna show you an example so that we all have the same idea in mind, because I believe that an example is worth 1,000 words. Anyway, here we receive a call requesting for an ambulance for a man in Torrevieja, in the province of Alicante, who is suffering life-threatening injuries after a car crash. Also, while you hear the call, you're also going to see how the call report is being filled out at the same time that we carry out. Sorry, at the same time that we carry out the interview.
I don't know where we are exactly. Oh my God, there's a guy who's stuck underneath the car. I'm begging you, please get the ambulance here quickly. Okay, are you in the activity? Yes. Okay, where exactly? We're at the corner of Mayor and Arsenal Streets, right there on the junction. Okay, just let me check, okay? On the junction of Mayor and Arsenal Street, sir, please. On the junction of Mayor and Arsenal Street, sir? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, right. We need to know the person in the ambulance, okay? Try to calm down and then we'll help you. How many people were involved in the car? Please, the ambulance, right? Yes, please do answer my question, sir. We will connect, okay? We're going to help you. How many people were involved in the crash? Two cars, just two cars. Are the cars blocking the road? One of them went off the road and hit a horse out, but the other one was in the middle of the road. There's stuff everywhere, scattered all over the road. There's blood everywhere. And I was in the hotel and I was stuck underneath the car. Okay, you stopped. I'm sir. Is there anyone else in there? No, just that man. Please, send the ambulance quickly. It's really urgent. Okay, please, could you tell me he's unconscious or unconscious? No, he looks like he's unconscious. And he looks like he's really seriously injured. Please, come as quickly as you can. Sir, one more question. Is anybody else trapped inside the vehicle? No, we have got out of the cars to have a good look. And there's a huge mess here everywhere. Oh my God, it's just awful. Okay, could you confirm your phone number? Yeah, it's 609 999 999. Thank you, sir. The emergency service is not going to be informed about it, right? Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Now I'm just going to take a few seconds to complete my report, my call report, and I'm going to send it to the corresponding emergency services following the protocols for car accidents with trapped citizens. Because depending on the type of emergency, we have different vehicles, different staff, different resources. So the 112 Comunitat Valenciana leaves the reception of this type of calls in foreign languages in the hands of accredited multilingual staff in the 112 Public Emergency Service. And these people are at the same time well-trained and experienced emergency call operators. It wouldn't be possible otherwise. In this sense, we take a special group of call handlers of the 112 emergency line, and they act as public administration representatives and intercultural linguistic mediators at the same time. What's the positive thing about this? Is that victims and witnesses have the perception that they are actually talking directly to the public administration when they need it most. Without their telephone line, without the telephone interaction having to be mediated by third parties or needing to wait online to be redirected to an external language service, which intrinsically improves the call experience, the quality of the interview, and this has a positive impact on the resolution of the emergency. This is the catalog. I have marked in bold the most common. And these are the possible settings in which the interpreter-mediated communications take place. As you can imagine, being aware of these different settings help us to prepare for each interview with glossaries, special databases for chemical products, dangerous goods, etc. We do not have internet connection or the use of any other automatic translation engines. We don't have access to any dictionary. We don't have access to internet, just for the protection of the emergency software and the emergency equipment. As you could see in the call, we conducted the interview. This is phase 1, in which we are actually mediating, because we're actually organizing the information. We're changing registers. We're adapting those prompts that you could see in Spanish. They're just keywords. So I was actually making or turning them into proper English questions, trying to reorganize the conversation, collecting the information that the emergency response teams need. And of course, I was summarizing and I was trying to manage the communication as effectively as I could do. I mean, despite the background noises, the background neighbors, witnesses who were actually interfering with my communication with the witness. This would be the second part. We couldn't see it because when we hung up and I sent my report to the stations, then I need to remain available. And this is when telephone interpreting comes into stage. I need to be there present just in case the police gets there. They need to fill up a witness statement or a victim statement, or the doctors on site, they need to give some instructions to the patient, to the family of this man who was actually there with them about the medicine that they were going to administer, etc. Other possibilities could be that before deploying the emergency equipment, they need to contact me again just to verify some more information, and then I need to stay in line. So there's different possibilities. Sometimes I've got for example, the emergency response team and the citizen, they're both sharing the same space and I'm not. Sometimes I've got the citizen in one place, the police officer in a different place, and I'm right in the middle. Sometimes I've got the doctors in the hospital, the patients at home. I mean, that's where telephone interpreting comes in place. And then we also have non-emergency calls. This is where the cultural mediator appears, and sometimes the citizens need some information regarding animal rescue, animal protection in Spain, how to fill up a complaint report, or sometimes what time the city hall opens and closes, because they need to fill up some information. I mean, do some paperwork there. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to what we do at the 112 Emergency Services. The most important thing is that access to the Valencian Public Emergency Service is guaranteed by law in the main languages of the EU. So if you travel to Valencia, you're going to be protected in that sense. According to my research, this has been proved to be an effective approach to providing life-saving assistance in several languages on site. Remember the characteristics of the setting. Each second counts. So here, the mediators and interpreters at the public emergency services are not invisible. Our participation is active in the communicative exchange. So we need in-depth and up-to-date knowledge of protocols, geography, locations, languages, new technologies and equipment, emergency management competencies, etc., and also the law. So my question for the audience is, are we in front or are we actually facing a new professional profile within public service interpreting and translation that we've been probably ignoring because why not? It's difficult to access these centers due to confidentiality and security. You cannot trespass their doors. So we are interpreters, we're mediators in emergencies, we have to communicate, we're intercultural experts, we're active interlocutors, and we also have to deal with our own emotions. That'll be another episode. So with all this in mind, I mean, what we have in mind here is the protection of the citizens, and that's why we work here every day. We do our research to actually improve the citizen safety when they are abroad. Thank you so much.
Profesional desde el año 2008, licenciado en Traducción e Interpretación por la Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria y desarrolla su labor docente en el ámbito de la traducción y la interpretación en la Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, campo sobre el que centra también su línea de investigación. Cuando quiera.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes a todos. Un momentillo que pongo esto a pantalla completa, si soy capaz. Ups. Gente, ¿cómo se pone aquí para ver? Control L. Gracias. Yo sin esto. Ahora. Ok, vale. Pues muchísimas gracias. En primer lugar, me gustaría agradecer a la Universidad de Alcalá de Henares y a los organizadores de este 8º Congreso por invitarnos, por permitirnos estar aquí hoy presentando esta propuesta de preparación del intérprete, un estudio previo para la gestión de los conocimientos a través de una aplicación de elaboración de glosario. Me gustaría también agradecer a los compañeros intérpretes que están hoy haciendo una labor titánica. Todos los que vivimos en cabina prácticamente sabemos lo que es interpretar un viernes por la tarde, después de varios días de congreso, así que lo están haciendo genial. Muchísimas gracias por su trabajo. Voy a intentar no extenderme mucho, precisamente también por eso mismo, porque sé la hora en la que estamos, pero sí me gustaría presentar un poco la investigación que estamos llevando a cabo. Bueno, como ha dicho Mar, mi nombre es Benearo Álvarez, soy profesor asociado de la Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria y desarrollo gran parte de mi actividad docente en la interpretación, este año y los últimos años principalmente en la interpretación consecutiva. Dentro de la Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria pertenezco al Departamento de Filología Moderna, Traducción e Interpretación, con docencia actualmente en la Facultad de Traducción e Interpretación, y además pertenezco al Grupo de Investigación Trial, Traducción, Interpretación y Aprendizaje de Lengua, que está adscrito al Instituto Universitario para el Desarrollo Tecnológico y la Innovación en Comunicaciones, el IDETIC. Pues bien, hoy vamos a presentar un estudio centrado básicamente en la gestión de los conocimientos a lo largo de todo el proceso de la preparación previa de que todo intérprete necesariamente tiene que llevar a cabo antes de abordar un encargo de interpretación. Este estudio forma parte de mi tesis doctoral, que en la actualidad estoy elaborando bajo la dirección de Jessica Pérez Luzardo en la Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria y que básicamente va a versar hoy sobre algunos aspectos introductorios, como puede ser lo que entendemos grosso modo por preparación previa, seguido posteriormente de los diferentes conocimientos que debe tener en cuenta en todo momento el intérprete en esa fase preparatoria, para ya luego dar el salto a lo que sería nuestro estudio, ver cuáles son sus objetivos, algunos datos preliminares, porque estamos todavía recopilando datos, todavía está haciendo una investigación que está en activo, para luego ya terminar en lo que sería una propuesta que está incipientemente surgiendo, que queremos presentarles aquí hoy. Pues bien, creo que a ninguno se nos escapa que la labor de la preparación previa del intérprete, sin duda, es una de las claves esenciales para lograr el éxito dentro de nuestra labor como intérprete. Porque contar con una preparación sólida previa nos permite tener una especie de contexto o enmarcar las palabras de nuestro orador dentro de un contexto sobre el que somos conocedores y nos sentimos cómodos interpretando. Esta preparación siempre va a tener una doble vertiente. En primer lugar, hablamos de una preparación documental en la que nos centramos en contenidos de carácter más cultural, más temático, a lo mejor de conocimientos enciclopédicos del mundo, como veremos más adelante. Y por otro lado, una preparación más terminológica que tiene un corte quizás un poco más lingüístico, podamos decir. Disculpen. Bien, por lo tanto, a nuestro entender, la preparación previa tiene una doble, implica tener que manejar, gestionar y tener bajo control diferentes tipos de conocimientos que deben posteriormente interactuar a forma de red cuando interpretamos en la cabina o en cualquier otro acto interpretativo. Estos conocimientos pueden dividirse en dos grandes categorías, quizás los conocimientos lingüísticos, que el título ya es de por sí bastante descriptivo, son aquellos que hacen referencia a unidades terminológicas, unidades lingüísticas o más relacionadas con la fraseología, y también unos conocimientos extralingüísticos, que son aquellos que nos van a favorecer quizás un contexto mucho más sólido y un contexto mucho más rico para nosotros posteriormente poder interpretar dentro de una lógica que comparten el orador con su público meta. Entre los conocimientos extralingüísticos, pues además de el conocimiento del mundo, el conocimiento de fondo, los conocimientos enciclopédicos, podemos incluir también conocimientos culturales y otras muchas variantes. Bien, contar con conocimientos amplios culturales del mundo, enciclopédicos y de fondo, sin duda facilita la generación de un contexto, que es lo que veníamos antes denominando una especie de red, en el que poder enmarcar el mensaje original que nos transmite el orador en la lengua meta y así poder conectarlo con los conocimientos que el público como experto comparte en alguna medida con el orador, y nosotros seremos ese puente que facilita ese nuevo contenido que se está expresando sobre la tarima que llegue al público que está escuchándonos. Bien, por lo tanto, debemos entender que la gestión del conocimiento por parte del intérprete en la fase preparatoria, antes de llegar a la cabina, es una tarea que no podemos esquivar. Es cierto que en ocasiones se desarrolla con una mayor o una menor intensidad, dependiendo de la familiaridad que el intérprete tenga con el tema que está interpretando. Si es un tema recurrente, pues evidentemente el proceso preparatorio será siempre mucho menos intenso, porque eso ya viene de antiguo, ya se puede aprovechar material o se puede aprovechar conocimiento que ya se ha adquirido. Entonces, entendemos que el intérprete no debe, como comenta Herbert ya en 1952, no debe convertirse en una especie de enciclopedia andante. No se pretende eso. Se pretende que contemos con las herramientas necesarias para poder gestionar esa información generalista o más especializada que nos ofrece el orador. Pero sí tenemos que tener esa curiosidad constante como intérpretes de ir aumentando el conocimiento a medida que vamos avanzando en nuestra práctica profesional y en nuestra carrera profesional. A nuestro entender, el éxito del proceso interpretativo en este sentido radica en la correcta interconexión que se puede establecer entre todos estos conocimientos que hemos ido adquiriendo de forma aislada, para así poder ir sabiendo dónde encajarlos dentro de ese contexto que nos está planteando el orador, ¿no? Y poder luego finalmente dar el mensaje meta de una manera lo suficientemente clara y bien contextualizada que el público, que no olvidemos es un público especializado, lo reciba con la naturalidad con que lo recibiría si lo estuviese escuchando directamente de boca del orador. Entonces, esto nos lleva ya, sabiendo ya más o menos cuál es el punto de partida, la importancia de la preparación previa, la importancia de los conocimientos, esto nos lleva al estudio que estamos desarrollando y a intentar entender cuáles son los objetivos que nos mueven al desarrollo de esta investigación. Bueno, pues en primer lugar, lo que nos invita a dilucidar la forma en que los conocimientos se abordan por parte de 3 grupos diferentes de sujetos. Lo hemos dividido de esa manera. Por un lado, tenemos estudiantes de grado de Traducción e Interpretación, principalmente de la Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria y de la Universidad Internacional de Valencia. Estudiantes de posgrado que principalmente proceden de la Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria también y del Máster Europeo de Interpretación de Conferencias de la Universidad de La Laguna. Y por último, nos hemos adentrado un poco más en los intérpretes profesionales para ver cómo perciben ellos la preparación previa y los procesos de documentación y estudio terminológico. Hemos decidido esta estructura porque queríamos abordar desde un principio, desde cómo se aborda esta preparación previa desde el momento en que se inicia la formación como intérprete hasta el momento en que se llega ya a la vida profesional. Pues bien, lo que pretendemos con ello es entender la forma en que tanto los estudiantes como los propios intérpretes profesionales unen o tejen esas redes de las que estamos hablando, de conocimientos que van adquiriendo, cómo hacen que se entrelacen y sobre todo cómo las elaboran, cómo las recopilan y posteriormente cómo las almacenan para posteriormente poder reutilizarlas de una manera intuitiva o de una manera efectiva. Les voy a presentar algunos datos ahora, así, insisto, son preliminares porque el estudio todavía está abierto. De hecho, en las próximas semanas vamos a relanzarlo tanto en la Universidad de Las Palmas como en la Universidad Internacional de Valencia y en los propios másteres. De hecho, hoy no traemos datos de alumnos de posgrado porque actualmente, teniendo en cuenta que estos grupos son siempre mucho más reducidos, la muestra es mucho más insignificante a día de hoy. Entonces, pretendemos conseguir unas 20, 25 muestras más en las próximas semanas, pero consideramos que los datos que tenemos a día de hoy del grupo de alumnos de grado y del grupo de profesionales ya nos dan una pista de por dónde pueden ir los tiros, más o menos, ¿no? Bien, los alumnos de grados que hemos encuestado a día de hoy 105, de todos los datos que nos aportan, creo que los más relevantes a día de hoy, dada la concisión de tiempo que tenemos, son que solo el 11% de los estudiantes de grados encuestados usan aplicaciones específicas para la elaboración de glosarios. Tenemos que tener en cuenta aquí el perfil general de este alumnado. Este alumnado básicamente son nativos digitales. Entonces, a nosotros nos llama mucho la atención que tan solo sea una décima parte prácticamente los que usan aplicaciones cuando están todo el día con el teléfono o con las aplicaciones. Entonces nos llamó bastante la atención. De hecho, nos han publicado un artículo recientemente en The Interpreters Newsletter en el que abordamos esta perspectiva de una manera un poco más profunda, ¿no? Por su parte también hemos visto que el 91% de estos estudiantes reconocen que la preparación previa y contar con conocimiento antes de llegar al ejercicio de interpretación o a las prácticas de interpretación que se les pide es necesario para poder tener un buen desempeño, lo que nos choca un poco, ¿no? Porque si usaran aplicaciones, quizás ese procedimiento de adquisición terminológica sería mucho más rápido. Es curioso ver incluso cómo incluso a veces el porcentaje de alumnado que prefiere hacer fichas en papel llega a superar el uso, por ejemplo, de aplicaciones. Algo a nosotros nos llamó mucho la atención, desde luego. En cuanto a los intérpretes profesionales, que generalmente esgrimen que el problema principal al que se enfrentan para no hacer glosarios es la falta de tiempo. Están constantemente en cabina, no les da tiempo a prepararse de una interpretación a la otra y a veces llegan sin hacer más que una mera preparación rápida en la pausa de café antes de empezar a interpretar. Pues vimos que el 96% de los profesionales encuestados consideran que podrían desarrollar un sistema mucho más integrado de preparación previa si contaran con herramientas que se lo facilitaran, que les hicieran esa labor un poco más dinámica. Bueno, pues teniendo en cuenta estos resultados, aparte de otros muchos resultados que estamos analizando actualmente, vamos a crear una aplicación dentro del estudio de la propia tesis, como, digamos, estamos valorando la posibilidad a través de diferentes proyectos para darle una aplicación práctica a todo este estudio que estamos haciendo, que sea evidentemente de utilidad no solo para nuestro estudiantado en las universidades con las que tenemos contacto, sino también de cara al intérprete profesional para que pueda agilizar su trabajo, centrado en el instrumento que nosotros consideramos que aglutina mejor todo este trabajo y esta interconexión de conocimientos, que es el glosario. Para nosotros, se trata de un instrumento que tenemos que conseguir que sea mucho más atractivo para los estudiantes, que entre otras razones dicen que muchas veces por el coste no acceden a esas aplicaciones porque no son gratuitas, muchas veces nos dicen que es porque al final el resultado que sale es simplemente un Excel con una decoración un poco más bonita, entonces para eso usan Excel o una tabla de Word. Entonces queremos conseguir, teniendo en cuenta ese conocimiento que nos transmite nuestro alumnado, un producto que resulte más atractivo y que interconecte todos esos conocimientos que ellos adquieren de muchísimas redes diferentes también, de muchísimas fuentes diferentes. Tenemos que tener en cuenta que nuestro alumnado recurre ya incluso a vídeos de TikTok para documentarse. Entonces, tenemos que ser plenamente conscientes de que esa realidad tiene que estar integrada de alguna manera aquí dentro. Y pensando en el intérprete profesional, consideramos que esta herramienta tiene que ser lo suficientemente intuitiva y que sea fácil de compartir para que el trabajo con otros compañeros agilice mucho la labor y que también les reste tiempo de preparación para que lo integren de manera mecánica dentro de sus tareas habituales, ¿no? Antes de llegar a la cabina. Entonces, por resumir un poco, se tratará de una herramienta dinámica que nos permitirá crear glosarios que van a estar en línea y que se podrán compartir entre compañeros que estén trabajando juntos en un mismo, ya sea trabajo de clase o ya sea en una cabina o en un entorno cualquiera, y que además nos permita crear como resultado final bases de datos personales en los que se integren aquellos elementos que para nosotros como intérpretes son de interés y que nos van a servir no solo para solventar los problemas terminológicos y documentales que puedan ir surgiendo a lo largo de la interpretación, sino también para que las tengamos disponibles para futuros encargos, en los que pueden ser repetitivos. Todos los que somos intérpretes trabajamos todos los años en congresos que se repiten constantemente. Pues en congresos sobre turismo, en Canarias hacemos 800 al mes, evidentemente, pues todos los años se repiten. Y eso pues va creando una base de datos que ha creado uno propio, uno mismo, y que se puede reutilizar. Eso obviamente también tiene una clara... Yo hablo mucho de interpretación de conferencias porque es el campo donde yo me desarrollo profesionalmente en mi inmensa mayoría del tiempo, pero también tiene una clara aplicabilidad en el mundo de los servicios públicos, porque los compañeros que se dedican a ese ámbito trabajan en temas donde el vocabulario, donde la terminología, donde la fraseología se repite constantemente. Entonces, está más que justificado tenerlo bien localizable, ¿no? Bien, nuestra investigación continúa, evidentemente, como ya les he comentado. Les pido, siempre voy pidiendo por ahí, de hecho fuera les pedí también, que en la medida de lo posible, si tienen a bien, nos puedan echar una mano con 2 estudios que estamos desarrollando en este momento, relacionados de alguna manera con nuestra investigación. Por un lado tenemos que está relacionado con el inglés como lengua franca. Tienen ahí el QR si lo quieren escanear. Si no, tenemos unos tarjetones que les doy donde están los QR también disponibles para que los puedan consultar. Está más relacionado con la tesis, que es sobre la preparación previa para los intérpretes profesionales. Tienen la versión en español a la izquierda, la versión en inglés a la derecha, la que resulte más cómoda para ustedes. Y aquí les dejo mi correo electrónico de la Universidad de Las Palmas, por si necesitaran en cualquier momento contactar con nosotros. Sé que, insisto, es viernes por la tarde, estamos todos cansados, imagino que no va a haber una gran avalancha de preguntas, pero estoy más que dispuesto a responder cualquier pregunta en este correo electrónico. Si están por Las Palmas de paso, estaré más que encantado de atenderles en la Facultad de Traducción e Interpretación. Las Palmas siempre es una buena opción para ir a investigar y para darse un paseo. Y poco más. Muchísimas gracias, insisto, a los compañeros intérpretes. Espero no haber ido muy rápido. Gracias a la moderadora, al panel, a todos ustedes por estar aquí y a la universidad y al Congreso por permitirme estar hoy con ustedes compartiendo mi investigación. Gracias.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Pues tenemos tiempo para preguntas, que aunque Beniaro piense que no hay, nunca se sabe. Si tenemos alguna pregunta para los ponentes. No tenemos el micrófono.
Gracias. Y tenía entendido que se trabajaba esa llamada de emergencia, la atendía o bien Dualia, pero no sabía si el 112 en la Comunidad Valenciana solamente va aparte. No sé si me he explicado bien.
Perfectamente. Bueno, en cuanto a la primera pregunta, la formación y el acceso para trabajar como mediador e intérprete en el Centro de Coordinación de Emergencias de la Generalitat Valenciana, es un proceso bastante complejo. Suelen haber convocatorias según las necesidades del servicio. Entonces, pues cualquier ciudadano puede postularse. En principio, siempre se requiere pues bueno, un cierto número de pruebas antes de acceder a un mes de formación intensa. Este tipo de pruebas consiste en prueba lingüística. Se recibe una llamada normalmente aleatoria, a cualquier hora del día te pueden llamar y empiezan a hablarte en inglés y tienes que contestar, estés en casa, en el Mercadona, en el supermercado Exacto, tirando a la terreta. Entonces, bueno, pues empezamos por ahí. Luego, si te convocan para hacer una prueba de memoria en el que te proporcionan muchísimos datos, en mi caso fue un naufragio, pues tenías que memorizar la eslora de un barco, la ruta, el número de pasajeros, en qué los puertos en los que paraba, qué ocurría, etc. Entonces, eso era una prueba. Luego también había tipo de mecanografía. Y una vez pasas todo, bueno, no recuerdo muy bien si había algo más, pero esas son las 3 pruebas básicas. Luego accedes a un curso de formación en el que te comprometes a asistir durante un mes, no sé si ahora será un poquito más, pero aproximadamente 4 semanas, en las que recibes formación intensa sobre protocolos, geografía de la Comunidad Valenciana, incluidas mapas de carreteras, organización geográfica, localización donde, bueno, diferentes localizaciones un poco más problemáticas, etcétera. También tenemos mucha costa, eso significa rescate, vocabulario específico, también significa pues estar un poco a la altura de las demandas de ese tipo de llamadas, ¿no? para poder gestionarlas de una manera más eficiente. Y una vez pasas este curso, pues ya entras en sala. En principio estás trabajando con un compañero que tiene también su equipo con el tuyo, estáis conectados al mismo equipo y tú gestionas la llamada, pero siempre sabes que como cuando aprendes a conducir, siempre está tu profesor al lado que tiene también sus pedales y en el momento que hay que intervenir, interviene y así te vas formando hasta que poco a poco te quitan ya los rodines y ya vas tú solo. Y hay formación continua, el servicio siempre está muy preocupado por este tema, obviamente. Y también hay pues eso, escucha de llamadas mensual, donde te van evaluando y van centrándose un poquito en las problemáticas o las casuísticas más frecuentes. Y en cuanto al modelo de la Comunidad Valenciana, pues sabemos que según el Real Decreto, cada comunidad autónoma tiene autonomía para poder decidir sobre la estructura y sobre cómo gestionar el servicio. Mi investigación demuestra que el proyecto de la Comunidad Valenciana, durante los 24 años que lleva en marcha, es decir, desde la inauguración del servicio, optó siempre por la presencialidad de este personal especializado en sala. Eso no ocurre en toda España. Entonces, pues un poco mi idea de estar aquí es para pues, poner un ejemplo sobre la mesa. Estoy abierta a trabajar con servicios de emergencia, ver cómo podemos colaborar para siempre mejorar la atención al ciudadano cuando su vida está en riesgo, que es además un objetivo, el objetivo 16 de la Agenda 2030. Y creo que no lo deberíamos perder de vista. Recordemos que la directiva europea se marcó en el año 1991. Estamos en el 2023 y seguimos teniendo centros de emergencia pues, que gestionan las llamadas de la mejor forma que pueden, pero bueno, deberíamos un poco intentar mejorar los protocolos probablemente en servicio de idiomas para que tenga un impacto positivo en la resolución de la emergencia. A ti.
Muchas gracias, Verónica. ¿Hay alguna pregunta más?
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Gisela Policastro, soy profesora de la Universidad de Córdoba y quería hacer una pregunta a Benearo porque me ha parecido muy interesante la presentación y eso que me he tenido que incorporar un poquito más tarde porque estaba en la otra sala. Y quería, precisamente por no haber podido asistir, pero bueno, creo que es una pregunta que podría ampliar un poco el estudio. Nosotros estamos trabajando con una herramienta lexicográfica para desarrollar fichas terminológicas multimodales y en la ficha terminológica multimodal, el modelo, ¿no?, de ficha que estamos proponiendo, incluye el símbolo de interpretación, que es como una novedad, bueno, novedad. No hay fichas terminológicas que incluyan símbolos, pero claro, para la intérprete consecutiva es fundamental, ¿no? Entonces, me he incorporado y creo que el desarrollo del estudio que estáis llevando a cabo sería solo glosarios, ¿verdad? O sea, ¿sería solamente equivalentes terminológicos o hay un estudio previo con fichas y demás?
Sí, nosotros estamos estudiando... Nada, gracias a ti. Nosotros estamos estudiando el glosario, digamos, desde tres diferentes perspectivas, es decir, desde la utilidad que tiene ese glosario en tres fases. La fase pre-congreso, la fase durante congreso y la fase post-congreso. Entonces, en la fase pre-congreso, que digamos que es la que abarca un mayor tiempo, ¿no?, porque ahí el glosario tiene una función de estudio, de adquisición de conocimientos documentales, lingüísticos, extralingüísticos y demás, ahí nosotros lo que hacemos es, hemos estudiado, eso forma parte del estudio también, pero claro, aquí con las limitaciones de tiempo no podemos explicarlo todo. Hay una parte del estudio que se centra en la importancia de la imagen. Entonces, ¿cómo podemos integrar imágenes dentro de los glosarios y ver de qué manera pueden ser de utilidad? Imágenes que tengan sentido, porque nosotros hemos hecho algunas prácticas con estudiantes, les decimos de una forma muy rudimentaria que incluyan imágenes dentro de su glosario y nos ponen dibujitos dentro de la tabla de Word, que aquello no se ve de alguna manera, y muchas veces, hace un par de semanas, por ponerte un ejemplo muy simplón, estábamos haciendo un glosario sobre emergencia climática y uno de los alumnos puso aumento de las temperaturas y puso un sol. Digo, bueno, ¿esto qué sentido tiene? O sea, los alumnos no entienden el poder que tiene la imagen como ayuda, como asistente a la comprensión, a la adquisición de conocimientos. Entonces, claro, muchas veces pues hablamos, yo siempre pongo el ejemplo de un congreso en el que estuve yo interpretando que iba sobre alergia al oro para personas que se les ponían puentes de oro y no sabían que eran de oro. Entonces, claro, les salían muchísimas infecciones en la boca, pústulas y demás, pero había diferentes tipos. Digo, ahí es donde tienen que estar las imágenes. Tienes que tener imágenes, un glosario un poco escatológico, pero tienes que tener imágenes de todas esas posibilidades que te van a salir de forma que sean descriptivas, porque me las pueden poner medio en latín, medio en inglés, medio en español, pero si no tengo claro y me las ponen en un pantallón, en una presentación, me va a ayudar mucho más tener ese soporte visual, porque me da una idea de cuáles son los patrones de cada pústula, por ejemplo, ¿no? Entonces nosotros, yo que doy consecutiva, soy profesor de interpretación consecutiva, animo siempre a mis alumnos a que en esos glosarios, inicialmente, sobre todo en consecutiva 1, que están familiarizándose con la toma de notas, les animo a que no hagan un término, no hagan un símbolo para cada uno de los términos que incluyen, porque eso al final les despista. Pero sí que hagan un ejercicio de identificar cuáles son los términos más recurrentes en cambio climático, en emergencia climática, temperatura, cambio climático, medio ambiente, digamos que establezcan como 10 o 12 símbolos que sean recurrentes y esos sí los incluyen en su glosario. Bien, porque muchos de ellos lo hacen directamente en el iPad y con el iPencil lo incluyen, otros sacan la foto, la pegan y entonces nos llegan como el glosario muy bien formado y eso desde el punto de vista académico, desde la fase anterior a llegar a la cabina en la carrera, a nosotros nos tranquiliza porque al final vemos que están integrando lo que es el concepto de glosario en un espectro muy amplio, no solo en el, como se dice coche, se dice car, sino que, oye, estoy pensando en los potenciales riesgos, los potenciales problemas que voy a encontrar cuando esté interpretando en consecutiva, en simultánea, en chuchotage o en lo que me toque ese día. Pero sí, nosotros hemos valorado la inclusión de imagen y yo dentro de imagen incluyo al símbolo, si es al símbolo de consecutiva lo que hace referencia, sí está planteado.
Vale, genial, muchas gracias.
Pero si tienes más dudas podemos hablar, ¿no?
Claro,
sin problemas.
Claro,
sí.
genial, gracias.
Gracias, Brian. ¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Sí, muy breve para Benejaro también es, bueno, como no has descrito realmente la tipología la metodología del glosario, quizás esté resuelta, pero te lo planteo quizás más que como pregunta, como observación. ¿Habéis pensado tener en cuenta utilizar para la tipología de datos los principios del acrónimo inglés FAIR, ¿no? Findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable, ¿no? Ese principio con el que ahora se manejan, que permite la conectividad y la integración de datos abiertos en bases terminológicas. Lo digo por si lo tenéis en cuenta, claro, porque...
No, ahora estamos terminando la parte, digamos, teórica, todavía no nos hemos adentrado, estamos con la parte del glosario, de cómo elaboraciones, estamos más centrados ahora a lo mejor en la parte de los estudiantes, que es de lo que tenemos más acceso a, digamos, a glosarios más rudimentarios, pero sí que exploramos avanzar, sobre todo cuando ya nos adentremos en la parte del glosario desde la perspectiva del profesional de la interpretación, que eso más, como usted comenta, más complejo, sí que contemplamos incluir metodologías más complejas.
Sí, porque en cualquier caso, si no, hay una gran parte del trabajo que se va a perder, se va a desaprovechar, porque lo esencial de la terminología es que se pueda compartir fácilmente, sí, ¿no? En estos tiempos. Esa era una de las premisas. También en cuanto a formatos, qué tipo de formatos que faciliten los intercambios, por ejemplo, la recuperación por memorias de traducción, formatos XML, lo que sea, ¿no? Que sean reutilizables por memorias. Entonces, para eso hay una gran experiencia y posibilidad de utilizar la asesoría, por ejemplo, de lingüistas computacionales del Centro de Supercomputación de Barcelona, que estarían disponibles. O sea, si os interesa, puedo poner en contacto.
Sí, pues lo agradecería.
Planteen las bases, que además hay muchas herramientas que son de acceso público, que están desarrollando. De hecho, están desarrollando una, que esperemos que salga pronto, ya lo diré, porque llevamos nada menos que 17 años buscando que cuaje esta plataforma, pero parece que por fin va a salir, pero no quiero vender la piel del oso antes de haberlo matado, pero todas estas herramientas se van a integrar en esa plataforma y algunas son ya accesibles, o sea que
pues se lo agradezco.
Lo tengáis en cuenta porque es fundamental no desperdiciar el trabajo, sobre todo el que se produce con recursos públicos como los que se producen en universidades, ¿no? Pues eso, que no... Es cierto que nosotros, una de las premisas era que el glosario fuera compatible, ¿no? Esa era la premisa básica. Y que fuera, todo se gestionara en línea, que los compañeros, y que fuera accesible desde diferentes dispositivos, pensando precisamente en lo que comentaba la compañera, en que el intérprete de consecutiva, que no está en la comodidad de la cabina, o el intérprete acompañante que va en una nave explicando un motor de avión y está caminando, pues tenga ese acceso rápido en los tiempos intermedios para poder consultar. Eso sí se planteó, pero lo que usted plantea evidentemente es muy interesante. Si no le importa, luego hablo con usted y sí, estaríamos muy interesados. Muchas gracias por la apreciación.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿No hay pregunta? Pues damos por concluido. Muchísimas gracias a los ponentes, a los asistentes y, como no, también a los intérpretes que un viernes por la tarde están aquí haciendo su trabajo. Muchísimas gracias. cosa que necesitéis. Yo trabajo con lenguaje. Hice el manual, se lo he comentado varias veces a Carmen, el manual de traducción, de la asignatura de traducción automática. Pero eso fue hace muchos años, ya he dicho que tenéis que actualizarlo porque está bastante desfasado, Claro. Ella lo va a hacer, le he dicho que utilice el libro que yo tengo con Celia Rico, que es de traducción automática, y de ahí pues, luego hablamos, sí, yo me quedo por aquí, si no, sí, yo le doy ahora mi tarjeta. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, ¿empiezas tú? ¿Quieres? ¿Termino yo? Sí. No, yo simplemente hablar de lo que he dicho esta mañana, ¿no?
Okay, are you ready for the closing ceremony? It's just 2 minutes. Just to say thank you for having me here. We hope you have enjoyed. And yes, I want just to mention, remember with the call for papers, I mean, there were different topics or panels. So, yes, as a way of information, because this was PhD in transition, so mention, I mean, how we have dealt with this problem. So, according to the data we have, I mean, just analyzing all the papers that we have been read here. So you see that the first one is curriculum design and training in PSIT. I mean, there have been more papers on this topic. Then the second one was PSIT in specific situations, I mean, in other situations. So that's just talking about different tendencies, maybe now, you know. And number 3 was access to public services. The number of, I'm talking about the number of papers read in these sections. And number 4, it was languages, resources, and migrant population. Then we have technological developments. So then ethics and good practices. And finally, PSIT and institutional relations. So just to call the attention to that, I don't know, I mean, if this has any meaning for you or not, but it's interesting that it seems that we are really worried about training because curriculum design, we know the reality, but now, and as someone said, there is too much knowledge. I mean, yes, we have so much information, but maybe we need to go a step further and we are trying to find a way. Maybe this is why we are worried about curriculum design and other situations, yeah, because that was interesting, yeah, say PSAT in other situations. So new topics have been raised here. So thank you for having me here. I hope you have enjoyed, and I hope to see you again. You know, we organize this conference every 3 years, so hopefully, I mean, we have gone a step further, and then we can say something else. For me, this is all, so thank you again.
Thank you, Carmen. Well, since the proceedings will be available and the recording also accessible, and we will also contribute from our YouTube channel and from the Commission in Spain to the disseminations. I think it's not the moment to do a recap of all the contents. I think everyone has made interesting network contacts, and from the Commission here, as we said, our Director General said yesterday, and I said this morning, we will keep supporting this initiative, especially with universities like Alcalá, with which we have a long-standing tradition of cooperation. And I would also say for the Spanish-speaking community, as representative of DGT here in Madrid, that we have prepared in a program of events coinciding with the Spanish presidency of the European Union, starting in July to end December. We will prepare an exhibition and other Translating Europe workshops in Grenada, in Barcelona, in many places. So keep aware of the media, of the channel of the European Commission, of the Twitter site of TEF, of the DGT. This is all. So thank you for coming, and keep collaborating and keep in contact.
And just to let you know that you will receive by email a certificate of presentation or attendance here. And also, keep an eye on the website, because we always publish the proceedings. So those that want to be there, you need to send your paper. And there are specific deadlines, or also, we offer also another possibility, just to publish your article in the peer-review FITIS International Journal. The same, the information is on the website, and we'll keep just adding information there. So that's all for now, but any question you have or any comment, please feel free to send us an email, because you see we are a team. FITIS is a team. And then we are in this team, we are teachers, but also students. Also, we are in contact with services, providers of services. So it's just a community that we have on PSAT here in Alcalá. So, well, we are ready, and we will offer our, whatever we can do, we'll do. So thank you. That's all for us.